You found your way back here, to where the boundary between reality and nightmares blurs. Get comfortable. Tonight's horror stories might just keep you up all night. I've been a trucker for close to 15 years now. This happened to me in 2017. I was driving an overnight haul through the Mojave Desert in California, headed for a destination in Arizona. I think I was delivering appliances, but I don't really remember. It was pitch black darkness in every direction. The headlights on my semi were really dim at the time, and I'd been putting off getting them fixed forever. Usually, I couldn't tell the difference, but since there were basically no other cars on the road, it was much more obvious. I remember having to strain my eyes every few minutes to make out the road in the distance. That could have been a horror story in and of itself. I was debating pulling over for a couple of hours and waiting for sunrise, but I didn't want to waste my time. I desperately needed the money at the time, so I kept driving even though it wasn't fully safe. I figured since it was basically a straight line, it would be okay. I think it was about an hour before sunrise when I saw something approaching fast in the distance. Worried about hitting an animal, I slammed on the brakes. As my truck screeched to a stop, I realized what was in front of me, a car with its hazards on. The weird thing was that it was in the exact middle of the road, literally on the double yellow. What was even weirder was that the passenger door was wide open. My truck stopped maybe a foot before hitting it. Not to toot my own horn, but I'm a pretty fearless guy, and I know my way around a bar fight. Because of this, I wasn't really scared when I saw the car. I was more curious than anything. I thought maybe someone needed a jump or something, so I reversed the semi and pulled over. I thought about throwing some flares down but decided against it since I hadn't seen a single other car on the road besides this one. I got out of my truck and made my way over to the car. It was a warm, still night. I remember thinking how strange it was that there was almost no wind. It was also really quiet that night. The faint click of the hazards was the only sound in what felt like the entire desert. I got a little closer to the car. I vividly remember that it was a new-looking red Ford Fusion. I approached the car a little cautiously. Like I said, the passenger door was wide open. I walked around the car and stopped in my tracks. It was completely empty. I made sure of it too, checking the back seat and anywhere someone might be lying down. There was literally no one inside. All of a sudden, I was much less sure about the situation. I was expecting someone to need help of some sort, maybe even someone who took a nap in a really dumb spot. I certainly wasn't expecting this, though. The car was literally empty. I cast a few glances over my shoulder, feeling a lot more uneasy now. I kept whipping my head around, looking in every direction. I felt like someone was going to charge me or something. The problem was it was so dark that I couldn't see that far in front of me except for what was lit up by my truck's headlights. It was eerie. I waited a while longer, thinking about getting back in my truck and forgetting about this whole thing. Someone was out there somewhere. Against my better judgment, I decided to keep investigating. I looked inside the car, but everything seemed completely normal. The key was even in the ignition, although the engine was turned off. I got back out of the car and made my way over to the trunk. Might as well have a look, I figured. I went to open it, but it wouldn't budge. Locked. I grabbed the key out of the ignition and unlocked the trunk. Still, though, the thing wouldn't budge. It was jammed from the inside somehow. I opened the back door and tried getting at the trunk through the back seat. To my surprise, it actually opened. There were 3 squished garbage bags back there, along with a rope that was tying the trunk closed. I remember glancing one more time over my shoulder before reaching for them. The coast was clear. I must have been within 5 inches from one of the bags when the loudest gunshot I've ever heard rang out into the night. I slammed my head on the roof of the car in shock. I didn't even think. I threw the keys on the front seat and got out of the car as fast as I could. As I was climbing into my semi, I heard a grungy voice yelling in the distance. He yelled, "Hey," a bunch of times, and his voice seemed to be quickly approaching. I scrambled into the semi and turned it on. I threw it in gear as fast as I could. I remember cursing a bunch of times as the engine initially stalled. And that's when I saw it. As my truck began pulling out, I saw a person standing at the trunk of the car. It was a short, husky guy with red hair. He was wearing overalls and shin-high boots. In his left hand, he was holding a small shovel. In his right, though, was an old-looking hunting rifle. We locked eyes for a few seconds as my truck began to drive past him. He didn't move. I remember him not looking crazy or anything. He had this worried look on his face. As I passed him, he dropped his shovel and started waving his hands. He yelled, "Wait," a few times, but I wasn't staying there another second. As I drove away, I watched in the rearview mirror as he ran after my truck for a few seconds before sprinting back to his car. It was clear he wanted me to stop, but there was absolutely no way I was going to do that. I stepped on it, pushing the semi much faster than I should have. I drove for like 5 minutes and started to think I was in the clear, but then I saw headlights fast approaching behind me. I remember feeling more scared than I've ever felt in my entire life. I called the police and told them what happened to the best of my ability. That's when the car was basically right on my tail. It started honking like crazy at me. I honestly didn't know what to do, so I just kept driving, praying to God he wouldn't try and ram me. After like 15 minutes of this, he cut in front of me and hit his brakes, forcing me to slow down. I was just about to crash into him when finally some flashing police lights appeared ahead. The Ford veered off to the right and sped into the desert, disappearing from sight. I pulled over and waited for the officer to show up. I frantically told him what had happened, but the useless cop decided to get a report from me rather than chase the guy down. I was so pissed about that. I told the guy like twice that he could probably catch up to him if he left now. The cop told me not to worry and that they'd do a thorough search as soon as backup arrived. He sent me on my way and said they'd call me if they ever had an update for me. They never did. None of my buddies have a story this crazy, and I've told it more times than I can count. I know what you're probably thinking. That guy was definitely burying bodies. That doesn't really explain why he had such a small shovel or why he tried to follow me. The bags in his trunk were also too small for that, although some of my buddies think he might have done some dismembering. For my own sanity, I like to think that he was burying some other kind of animal, maybe putting a diseased dog out of its misery or some dangerous snakes. I really have no idea. Either way, I've never been totally comfortable driving through deserts late at night after this experience. I'm sure you've seen some of the more modern videos online where truckers document their daily routines and provide tips for each other. Or maybe you haven't, but being as I'm on the younger side in this industry, every time I open TikTok or YouTube Shorts, that's all I see. I won't get into it, but I had to drop out of a pretty prestigious university for some personal reasons, and people always tell me I could have been more than a trucker. It's honestly not a bad gig though. I've been making deliveries for north of 2 years. Obviously, the only strenuous part of the job is the long hours. You can never truly gauge how the isolation will affect you without experiencing it firsthand. My only advice would be to make peace with whatever demons might be lurking in your subconscious, because they'll definitely eat at your brain in the lonely hours. That's what happened to me anyway. This happened to me 3 months after getting employed by my first company. I was basically as new in this trade as one could get. I was driving from southern New Jersey to Lafayette, Indiana, a 12-hour drive. 12 hours driving might not seem that crazy, but factor in the fact that I had just completed an 8-hour trip, and that should put things into perspective. I wanted to get deliveries done as quickly as possible, so I opted to drive through the night. I get to Lafayette just before 3 a.m. Things were going smoothly. There were virtually no other cars on the road, so I was able to push the semi a little faster than normal. About halfway through the drive, I remember reaching down at the center console to chug a Red Bull, but there weren't any. Of course, I had forgotten to restock my truck after completing my previous delivery. After slapping my dashboard a few times, I groaned in frustration, knowing I'd have to stop somewhere. There was nothing I hated more than having to make stops during my drives. I might be unique in this, but I always get exponentially more tired when my vehicle is immobile, even if I'm only stopped for like 20 seconds. After glancing up at the navigation, I figured I had no choice, either fall asleep on the road or stop and get an energy drink. In my brain, those options were pretty much equivalent. Reluctantly, I pulled into the first service stop I saw. I had literally no clue where I was, probably somewhere in Ohio at this point. Too late, I realized this wasn't actually a service stop. It was what looked like an abandoned gas station and a repurposed convenience store. Not sure if there's any better way to describe it. Either way, it looked like there was another quick stop store not far up the road, so I figured I'd go there if anything. I parked the semi. I made my way over to the first convenience store. To be completely honest, I was expecting one of two things to happen. Either the place would be open, or the door would be locked. You can imagine my surprise then when the door swung open into a pitch-black store. I looked around, hoping maybe I'd get lucky and there would be a drink or snack left behind. Just before I was about to turn around, my eyes adjusted to the darkness, and I picked up on a faint glow emanating from the corner of the room. I made my way over to it, and the glow turned out to be coming from a back room of some sort. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened the door slowly. To my pleasant surprise, there was a plugged-in refrigerator against the wall. Eagerly, I opened the door but found nothing. Literally nothing. The shelves had been removed, the whole appliance had been gutted. As I was shutting the door, I was 90% certain I heard a clatter from the main room, like something hitting the floor. I froze for a good 10 seconds. Had I imagined it? There was no way. Quietly, I walked back into the main room and looked around. Nothing. Part of me wanted to keep investigating, but I didn't have time for this. I walked out the entrance door and basically jogged to the other shop. It was open, thank God. I paid for my drink and made it back to my truck. Something about this whole stop felt wrong. I needed to get back on the road as soon as possible. I took one last glance at the abandoned store and noticed the door was now open. I was 100% positive I had shut it behind me. It wasn't my job to figure out what was going on here, so I started the engine and merged my semi back onto the highway. The caffeine started kicking in and snapped me out of my tired haze pretty quickly. My mind began to wander, and I started thinking about how bizarre that whole thing had actually been. I guess a squatter or an abandoned building wasn't the strangest thing in the world, but my brain couldn't explain that refrigerator, no matter what theory I thought of. I tried to forget about it and kept driving. It was then that I started noticing weird movements in the curtain behind me. Sweat started dripping down my forehead. I watched in the rearview mirror as the curtain seemed to billow and move, even though I didn't have the air on. I thought the worst: there was someone in my truck. I didn't have any weapons on me or anything, so I discreetly punched in the nearest police station on my phone. The drive there was the most tense and horrifying 20 minutes of my life. I kept imagining that person reaching out to grab me or trying to crash my truck. Finally, I approached the police station. I stopped the semi as close as I possibly could get and basically ran over to the police station. In seconds, my truck was surrounded by police, and after I opened the back, what I saw will stay with me for life. The police pulled out 3 homeless-looking people, 2 men and 1 woman. They were wearing rags and were wrapped in nasty-looking blankets. One of the men was armed with 2 switchblades. All 3 of them refused to talk but stared menacingly at me as they were getting cuffed. I have no idea what they wanted. I don't think I'll ever know. My name is Arthur. I've been a trucker for various companies for the better part of 15 years now. Things have become pretty routine at this point. Pick up the goods and materials, verify them for accuracy, and deliver them as instructed. We're not paid by the hour, so efficiency is the most important thing in this line of work. For someone like me who's been doing this forever, I like to think I can outwork all these young guns that are snapping these jobs up. This isn't always great, though. Usually, I push myself to the absolute limit when it comes to functioning on barely any sleep. 4 years ago, I was working for a warehouse based in North Dakota. For anyone who doesn't know, North Dakota is one of the flattest states, which makes trucking a little easier. This also meant that skipping out on a few hours of sleep could mean the difference between employment and getting the sack. It was a chilly Tuesday morning in May. The beginning of the week meant that more loads needed to be shipped, which meant more work for me. I wanted to knock it all out in one shot, so I traced my route into Montana accordingly, planning on not stopping even once to sleep. I hit the road a few hours after lunch, expecting to reach my destination very early the next morning. I pushed the semi as much as possible, doing maybe a couple over the speed limit. It was getting late, and I remember rubbing the crust from my eyelids as the clock ticked past midnight. I was having trouble keeping my eyes open, but I only had about an hour left in this drive, so I gritted my teeth and kept going. My buddy Tristan, who was also a trucker, introduced me to smelling salts when I first started out. If you don't know, smelling salts are basically some kind of crystals in a little bottle. One sniff and you're wide awake. You had to be careful, though. Too many back-to-back uses could be dangerous, or at least that's what Tristan told me. They burn your nose a little bit, but whenever I needed a boost, I'd reach for the smelling salts first. This was one of those times. I took a big whiff and shot my head back, my reflexes taking over. I felt the adrenaline course through my body and hoped the feeling would last the rest of the drive. A half hour shot by, and I was really struggling. I felt myself start to doze off, and the blare of my truck drifting into the shoulder jolted me awake. This was getting dangerous, I thought. I had to pull off. I was all alone on the highway, but there was nowhere to pull off. There were just woods on either side of me. I slowed the truck down, searching desperately for somewhere to pull over. At this low speed, my headlights pierced through the darkness, and I was able to see a lot more. As I looked around, I saw something that confused me. There was a purple dress lying in the middle of the road. What the hell, I thought, rubbing my eyes. Was I hallucinating? I blinked like 6 times just to make sure I wasn't going crazy. It was real. I approached the dress with my truck and stared at it as I rolled by. In hindsight, this should have been more of a red flag, but I think I was just too exhausted to process what was going on. About 200 or so yards away, I passed a pair of shoes. Now I was starting to freak out. What the hell was going on? I passed the shoes, praying to God there would be a place to pull off soon. My old man Finn was a super religious guy, so I clutched his old cross and hoped he would come through for me. A little further up the road, I saw a bunch more random clothing, some of which looked like little kids' clothing. This time, I stopped the truck. The panic started to set in. Something was very, very wrong. I sat in the driver's seat with the truck at a standstill. I was expecting something to happen, but it never did. So I did what my instincts told me to do. I stepped out of the truck and went to inspect the clothing. I still remember the feeling of the chilly morning air piercing my skin, which definitely helped my exhaustion. I approached the pile as cautiously as I could. It was indeed kids' clothing. It looked like there were both boy and girl pieces of clothing in the pile. I looked around into the woods, but I couldn't see much of anything in the darkness. I had my head on a swivel, worried that this was some kind of trap. I decided it was not my business to figure out what was going on, so I made my way back to my truck. Just then, I heard a crunch from the left. I whipped around, trying to see what was there. I stood there, waiting to hear another sound. After about 30 seconds, there was another crunch, but this time from the opposite side of the road. My survival instincts kicked in, and I sprinted towards the truck. I jumped into the front seat, but just before I slammed the door, I heard a child's scream ring out. I froze, my heart bursting out of my chest. I was caught at a crossroads. I wasn't going to fight some random people in pitch-black woods, but I couldn't just abandon some helpless kids either. Before I could make a decision, another almost identical child's scream rang out. Without thinking, I turned the truck on and pointed its nose toward the spot in the woods where I heard the noise. My headlights lit up about 30 yards into the woods. There were 3 or 4 people, one of whom was holding a massive speaker. They ducked behind a couple of trees as my truck lit them up, but I had exposed them for just enough time to make out what they were doing. They hid from the light before I could really make out any distinctive features, but I swear on my old man Finn's grave, they were holding up a speaker, trying to lure me into the woods with a fake kid screaming. I was just in shock. I just sat there staring at the trees those people had just hidden behind. I reached for my phone to call the police, but before I finished dialing, I heard a thump from the body of the truck. Someone had thrown something from the other direction. I was done. I turned back to face the road and slammed on the gas. As I sped off, I could make out a person on the other side of the road. He shouted something I couldn't understand before launching something at the truck that cracked the glass of my passenger side window. I drove the final hour in silence. I was too scared to process what had just happened, but there was no way in hell I was stopping to sleep in those woods. I completed my delivery and then knocked out. I must have slept for 10 hours straight. When I woke up, the first thing I did was call the police, who told me they'd investigate those woods and give me any updates. I then thought about About 7 years ago, on my way home from my parents' house, I experienced something truly terrifying. I was 22, young, naive, and well, dumb. I had just moved into my first apartment, becoming the first in my family to leave our sleepy old train town. I visited home every Sunday to see my family, do laundry, and enjoy Sunday dinner. I lived about 45 minutes up the highway, so I generally headed home by 6 p.m. On this particular night, there was a relentless summer thunderstorm that had been pouring down rain all day. Just as I was packing up to leave after dinner, my cousins dropped in, so I ended up sticking around for a few more hours to visit. I left my mom's around 10 p.m. in the pouring rain. This was the first time after moving out that I encountered something that truly scared me. I never told anyone about this, possibly out of pride. Everyone always gave me trouble about living alone as a single female in a new area. Anyway, here it goes. I left my parents' house around 10 p.m. in the pouring rain. I'm driving down the service road that leads out of town and eventually turns into the on-ramp to the highway. As you leave town, the service road turns into one lane right in front of a quarry train loading station. I'm not really clear on what that place is, but it always gave me the creeps. If you're unfortunate enough to pass through when a train is crossing the road to load, you'll be stuck there for a while. Once the road passes the tracks, it turns back into 2 lanes and goes up a steep hill. As I'm approaching the quarry, I can make out the orange lights on a red cab 18-wheeler sitting in the quarry parking lot. Mind you, it's pouring rain, visibility is low, so I can't make out the trucker until I'm pretty close to him. As soon as I can see it's a trucker, he pulls out into the road. I had to slam on my brakes to avoid hitting the trailer on the back of the truck. I skid around on the road until I regained control of the car. Now I'm stuck behind this dummy who just pulled out without paying attention. I keep my distance because I'm flustered. For the record, my headlights were on, so if he had been paying attention, he should have seen me. Honestly, with the heavy rain and low visibility, who knows? So, I'm behind this guy as we cross the tracks and begin to climb the steep hill. Despite it turning into 2 lanes on the hill, he's driving right up the middle of the 2 lanes. Figuring he didn't realize it was 2 lanes, I just putter along behind him, keeping my distance. As soon as he reaches the peak of the hill and the road levels out, he moves over to the right lane. Yes, finally. So, I move over and begin to pass him. As soon as I get past the front of the truck, he swerves behind me quite abruptly and begins flashing his high beams at me. Usually, when someone flashes their lights behind you in our area, it means turn on your lights, but mine were already on. I checked as soon as he started flashing at me. Weirded out, I put my blinker on and safely changed lanes to get out of his way. He follows my lane change and begins laying on his horn. The honking startled me, and I began to get a lot more flustered. What the hell did this guy want? I moved out of his way and my headlights were on. Why didn't I just speed up and zip away, you may be asking. Well, I grew up in this area. It had been raining heavily all day, and I knew that the service road floods a little in heavy rain, both on the shoulders and in random spots in the middle of the lanes. It's a small Midwestern town, our roads are shitty. I had already skidded and nearly wrecked once, and I wasn't about to floor it on this bumpy, flooded service road and risk wrecking again. There is nothing between that quarry and the highway, just about 4 or 5 miles of wooded area. If I wrecked, it would have been just him and me. This went on for the next 4 or 5 miles to the highway. He began tailgating me in addition to the high beams and honking. Once the tailgating began, I was in tears. I didn't know what this guy wanted from me. I was just trying to stay out of his way and get home safely. That's all I wanted. I changed lanes 2 more times, making 3 total. He followed me from lane to lane. As we approached the highway, I floored it. He couldn't accelerate quickly enough to keep up, and I lost him finally. As soon as I realized I'd lost him and was safe on the highway, I just lost it. I was a hysterical wreck. There is only one exit after getting on the highway to stop in the small town the highway runs through. After that, it's all wooded for a good 30 minutes. Here's a more structured and coherent version of your text with appropriate pauses. I thought about getting off at that exit to calm down and pull myself together, but I just wanted to go home, so I sped right past it. I should have stopped. Once the city was no longer visible in my rearview mirror, I felt much calmer. I managed to scramble my cell out of my purse and put it in my lap just in case. The rain led up to a drizzle the further I went, but I was still pretty on edge. There weren't many other cars on the highway, and most of them were truckers. I'm cruising along in the center lane when the truck next to me in the passing lane begins blaring the horn and moves into my lane, forcing me over to the third lane. He continued moving over, nearly forcing me off the highway. I sped up and changed lanes right in front of him so that I'm back in the center lane. I slowed down until I was in line with the front cab. I double-clicked the home button on my phone, camera shortcut, and rolled down my window, starting to take pictures of the cabbie. I think the flashes made him realize what I was doing, and he began slowing down until he was behind me again. I got a lot of pictures. I sped up and lost sight of him behind me. I was satisfied I managed to get pictures, but I was so angry at this point. I pulled over onto the shoulder of the highway and waited for him. I just wanted to get behind him so I could get a picture of the license plate and report this. Sadly, he was on to me for sure. I noticed headlights behind me a long way back, but behind me nonetheless, on the shoulder of the highway. I waited, keeping an eye on the truckers passing me by, just to be sure I didn't miss him. I noticed a shadow pass through the headlights of the truck, which spooked me quite a bit. Did he get out of the cab? I didn't stick around to find out. I just took off and got home as quickly as possible. The pictures were a total failure. It was still drizzling. The flash combined with the drizzle just resulted in washing out the pictures. I could see the red cab, but no matter what filters I used, there was no making out exactly what the cab said. Red cab trucker, you're the reason I have a dash cam in my car. We were hitchhiking through Europe, my then boyfriend and I, and on our way back home, a truck driver picked us up. We had had a few weird encounters on our trip before, but we had been on the road for about a month, and nothing really scary happened until we met this guy. He was a young guy, about 25, quite regular, spoke English okay, and had been away from home for a long time. I was a bit younger, with my boyfriend being around his age. My boyfriend was tired, so he took a seat on the bed in the truck and wasn't really trying to hold a conversation. During our trip, we switched turns as I usually do when I hitchhike with someone. One person talks with the driver, and the other relaxes in the back, so I was in the passenger seat. I think my boyfriend was even dozing off a little bit when the driver started complimenting me and asking about my boyfriend. It was still fine, nothing too weird, and I was just trying to talk to be good company. As we moved on, I started to feel a bit uncomfortable, but I didn't let anything on and only told my boyfriend that we should find truck drivers from our country to make the last part of our trip in one go. I translated this to English immediately because the truck driver became agitated and suspicious of what I was saying. I explained that we were really tired and our plan was to find our truck drivers before he had to take a long break so that we could continue traveling without interruption. We stopped for a short break at a gas station, and my boyfriend decided he was going to look for another truck driver in the parking lot, leaving me with this guy alone. Damn, the truck driver came on to me real hard, and I was scared shitless and didn't fight back. I could feel how aroused he was, and there was no doubt about his intentions. Luckily, my boyfriend was away for just a minute. At that moment, I realized we needed to get out of this situation fast. I didn't want to say anything to my boyfriend because I was scared of how he would react, so I decided to pretend nothing had happened. I was determined to get out at the next stop. We reached a large gas station for truck drivers only and told our driver we were going to look for other drivers heading our way. During our trip to this station, this guy got in touch with another driver, saying he could also take us, maybe one at a time. Damn, I thought, now he's planning a threesome. When I was finally alone with my boyfriend, I remained calm, hinted at what had happened, and insisted that we not stay with this driver no matter what. It took us about 5 minutes to find a group of truck drivers from our country. They were having beers and cracking jokes, and 2 of them agreed to take us. I jumped with joy. We went back to the truck to get our things. The guy had already brought his friend along and was offering my boyfriend to take a shower at the gas station, saying he would pay for him for no obvious reason. He was quite persistent, and as I very well remember, he never offered it to me. Needless to say, these 2 guys were very disappointed to see us go. I still remember how they were looking at me when I was taking our backpacks from the truck. I have never told my ex-boyfriend the details. I was just lucky that we got away from that truck driver, and I think he has never realized how bad the situation was. At that time, I was playing it cool the whole time, but inside, I was shaking. I could see how desperate that truck driver was and how much he wanted to get rid of my boyfriend. I was so angry at myself for staying with him in the truck by myself, but then all of our things were there. I was also angry for not fighting him back, but it was so sudden, and I got really scared. Well, I would never hitchhike alone. I was 18 at the time and had just started college, living out of state on my own for the first time. I had a pretty sheltered life. I am also a female, so my first semester at my out-of-state college had just ended. It was May, and I was on my way home from my brother's wedding. I'm about an hour away from my current residence, with a little over 3 hours left of my trip. Everything is going great, and I'm just cruising with the traffic. It was a notably busy day for that particular stretch of interstate, somewhere on I-40 in Tennessee. As I said, all was well until I checked my mirror. There was a truck a little farther back from the side of my car in the lane next to me. I could see his headlights in my passenger side mirror. I looked up because, even though it was the middle of the afternoon and super sunny out, this dude was flashing his lights at me. I tried to brush it off and assumed he just wanted to get into my lane, so I tried moving. He stayed behind me the whole time, not letting any other cars get between us. He kept flashing his lights at me, and I looked up at him. He waved and honked. This was a red flag, but I took it the wrong way. I thought, oh, I wonder if he's signaling me to pull over. I hope nothing is wrong with my car. The only reason I thought this was because, the week before, I had gotten a hole in my tire and had it patched. I was worried that the patch had fallen out and that my tire was going flat as I traveled. I'm freaking out about my car and plan to pull off at the next exit. Fortunately, it comes up quickly, and there is a gas station with some customers visible from the exit ramp. I head there and pull up at a gas pump. Curiously, the trucker follows me off the interstate and into the same parking lot, but he parks in a designated truck zone. I get out just before he parks and walk around my car, doing a quick inspection. I see him start to get out of his truck, and I decide to buy gas, even though I filled up before I left. As I swiped my card to pay for my gas, the truck driver had reached my car. Lucky for me, since I was already pretty freaked out by him following me off the exit, I had my phone in my hand with 911 already dialed, so I would just have to hit the call button. I left my driver door open and stayed between that and the gas hose, with him standing a few feet away from the back end of my car, the hose separating us. The first thing this guy says to me is, "Well, aren't you a pretty thing?" I'm screaming in my head now, imagining all possible scenarios for an emergency escape. He looked to be in his late 30s or early 40s and about 170 pounds. Me, I was 18, 125 pounds, without much muscle or fat anywhere on me. I wouldn't have been able to fight back much anyway. I told him thank you. He offered to buy my gas, and I declined, saying my parents gave me money. I was actually worried that he would expect something in return if I had taken his offer. He asked me questions like where I was from, where I was going, etc. Something went off in my head that just said lie, so I did. I didn't tell him what college I really went to, where I was really headed, or what I was doing. Nothing. My gas was done pumping after about a minute. With that, I told him goodbye, jumped in my car, and got out of there. I kept an eye on him as I left, making sure he didn't follow me any longer, and he didn't. I never saw him again. I don't know what he wanted with me that day, whether it was just to tell me how attractive I was or if he had something much worse planned. I really regret not reporting him to the police. Since this incident, I've always been leery of truck drivers. Back in 2013, I had just started an education, and after the first school period, I had to find an internship to progress. At the time, it proved almost impossible to get one, so while I was looking, I decided to take another job just to ensure we had food on the table. After searching for a while, I found out a friend of my fiancé's family had his own handicap bus company, a kind of taxi service for wheelchair users or otherwise disabled people, and he needed someone to cover the night shift since it was a bus that had to be on call at least 22 hours a day. Seeing that I'm quite the owl, I immediately told him that I'd be happy to take the job, and after I got the needed license, I was hired. The job was pretty basic: pick up and drop them off where they needed to go, and sometimes use a machine to get wheelchairs up or down some stairs. When there were no trips, I drove to a designated area and did whatever while waiting. I quickly found a truck stop in the area where I could park and catch some Z's. There was a gas station where I could buy coffee in the early hours of the shift. On the other side of the gas station's parking lot, on the opposite side of the truck stop, there was a rundown restaurant with a motel connected to it. To avoid disturbing the sleeping truckers if I got a trip in the middle of the night, I usually parked on the restaurant side. After parking there every night for a while, I noticed one particular room had a lot of people coming and going. In the beginning, I thought nothing of it. Then, one night at the end of summer, while I was half asleep with the windows slightly open, I suddenly heard yelling coming from the motel. A dude came tumbling out of the room and started running. A few seconds later, a big guy came running after him with something in his hand that I could not make out. I thought it was none of my business and went back to my half-sleeping waiting stage. Not much time passed, and my phone went off. I had a trip an hour's drive away, so I turned on the bus and was leaving the parking lot when I saw the big guy coming around the corner. The rest of the night I had back-to-back trips, so I didn't park until I got home. The day after, I didn't get a return to home zone until 2 o'clock or 3 a.m. When I arrived at the parking lot, the area where I used to park had fist-sized rocks strewn all over the place. Not connecting the dots at the time, I just parked a few spots over and started waiting. I fell asleep pretty fast but was jerked back into reality when a car right in front of my bus honked its horn, flashed the high beams, and revved its engine. I thought it was just some idiot who noticed me sleeping and found it funny to try to scare me, so I jumped out of the bus, about to tell him to screw off. But instead of driving off or stopping, the driver made the start brake motion with the car, indicating that I was the one who should screw off. Then I connected the dots. Not wanting to seem like a pushover, I stood still and stared at the car, not that I could actually see anything with the high beams almost blinding me. After what seemed like a really long time, but must not have been more than 30 seconds, the car drove off. After that, I decided to park near the trucks from then on. A month or so passed, and nothing had happened since the car episode. I figured that nothing more would happen if I just kept parking by the trucks. Then, one night, I had a long 12-hour shift on a Sunday, and I didn't have time to eat dinner before work that day. During the first half of my shift, I had back-to-back trips with no time to eat. So when I got a return-to-home zone, I quickly parked in the far end of the almost empty truck stop and got ready to eat my now very late dinner that my fiancée packed for me. I wanted to watch some TV on my phone while eating, so I sat with my back against the driver's side door and got comfy. While turning my back to the door, I accidentally hit the door lock with my elbow, but that was my luck. As I was sitting there scrolling Netflix on my phone, I suddenly felt the bus rock and heard the clack of the door handle behind me smack back into position. I quickly turned and saw a dude with a hood over his head quickly crouching and proceeding to lay down on the ground and crawl under the bus with a big kitchen knife in his right hand. I quickly got up and made sure the other two doors were locked. Then I looked in all directions to see if I could spot him. He was still under the bus, and I was sure as hell not jumping out this time since the knife made his intentions pretty clear. I turned on the engine, turned on the spots on the back of the bus, and looked around to see if it had scared him off. Lucky for me, it did. I saw him run off into a bushy, woody area at the end of the truck stop. I never parked at that truck stop again after that night, and I made sure all doors were locked every time I was parked. This happened when my now husband and I were moving from the east to the west coast of the US. This had been our second time making this trip, and this one was just to pick up a few last things and grab our two dogs. At this point, we were just trying to make good time since we were tired of being on the road and would only stop for food and restroom breaks. So we weren't strangers to rest stops at odd hours of the day. I can't remember what state this happened in because we do a lot of traveling, and rest stops have all blurred together over the years. Anyways, my husband had been driving for a while, and it was time to switch off, walk the dogs, and stretch our legs. So we pulled into a rest stop around 3 o'clock or 4 a.m. There was only one other vehicle in the lot, most likely with someone sleeping inside of it, and not that many truckers in the truck area, so the rest area was fairly empty. I jumped out of the car and let my husband know I was going to run into the restroom before I let the dogs out. While I ran in, he was going to hang out by the car to have a smoke and keep an eye on our dogs. However, we parked our car by the dog area, and to get to the restrooms, you had to walk over this hill. You couldn't see the restrooms from our car. Being late at night, my husband decided to walk most of the way with me to make sure I got there okay. I wasn't worried but didn't mind the extra comfort of having him there. I finished up in the restroom and came out to walk the dogs and let my husband take his restroom break. Even though it was late and I felt a bit cut off from the lighted area of the rest stop, I wasn't worried. I'm small and don't weigh much, but my dogs are German Shepherd mixes and very protective of me. Plus, I was taught self-defense at a young age and feel capable of defending myself if the time came. So I'm walking my dogs and letting them do their business when I noticed that one of the semi-trucks, which had been sitting on the far side of the stop, starts up and slowly drives in my direction. This didn't seem worrisome to me because they were on the trucker's side, and I assumed they were heading to the exit to get back onto the highway. I grabbed 2 doggy bags to clean up after my dogs and started heading to the trash can. As I'm walking, I'm suddenly blinded by bright headlights. I looked in the direction of the lights and saw that the semi, which I thought was leaving, had pulled up as close to the truck lot and car lot divide as possible and now had its brights aimed directly at me. Pissed off that someone was blinding me with their brights, I quickly tossed the poop bags away and started walking back to my car. As I'm walking away, the dude starts flashing his lights over and over again. I'm almost to my car, wondering if I'm missing something and becoming more and more irritated. He starts creeping his truck in my direction again while flashing his lights. My dog sensed my irritation and immediately went on alert, staring in the trucker's direction. I finally made my way to my car, and the guy is still flashing his lights while stopping his truck in my direction again. I don't scare easily, so I decided to stand there and glare in his direction. Then he finally stopped flashing his lights. Good, I assumed he was done and started getting my keys out to unlock the car. Suddenly, my dogs stiffened beside me, their hackles raised, and they began to growl. I heard the sound of a door opening and turned back in the trucker's direction. I saw his door was now opened, and I saw a foot starting to exit the truck. I'm sitting there thinking this guy is a complete idiot when, at this point, my husband shows up and wraps his arm around me while flipping the trucker off. The trucker's foot disappears back into his truck. He shuts his door and leaves the rest stop pretty fast. I told my husband about him flashing his lights, and he explained that truckers use this method to flag women down at rest stops for sex. I was grossed out. I'm guessing he thought I was alone because of how the rest stop was set up. However, I was in no way dressed like someone interested in random sex at a rest stop. I was wearing layers because it was cold and driving a newer car. Plus, what idiot thinks it's a good idea to try to approach someone with 2 huge dogs? Although I was never scared during the whole thing, I do think the situation was creepy because the guy was obviously not quite there and was acting pretty abrasive. A few months ago, I was driving back to school from visiting my parents. It's about a 2-hour drive, so I usually keep myself entertained with music. I'm a 5 feet 3 inches, 21-year-old female driving my dad's little old pickup truck alone in the leftmost lane of a 3-lane highway, dorking around to the music on the radio. Suddenly, I noticed a semi-truck going the exact same speed as me in the rightmost lane. Embarrassed for getting caught in dork mode, I stopped singing and tried to speed up so he couldn't see me anymore. He matched my speed, which ticked me off a little bit, so I looked at the driver, expecting to see some angry jerk. To my surprise, he was smiling and waving. Thrown off, I kind of chuckled and waved back. Big mistake. He moved over to the middle lane to be closer to me and now wouldn't stop smiling and waving. At first, I played nice, waving back a little because a semi-truck beats a tiny pickup truck any day. But I was mostly focusing on getting out of this guy's field of vision safely. I tried speeding up as fast as my truck would allow and slowing down as suddenly as I could without endangering anyone behind me, but he would just match my speed. If there was someone coming up in his lane, he'd move to the right at the last possible second and pass them before I could slow down and get behind them. He has a lot more practice with reckless maneuvering than I do, so he has me trapped and is using other cars to help him. The whole time, he's smiling, waving, and holding up the #1 sign for some reason I still don't know. His charm is rapidly fading as this continues for about 5 miles. I got worried and called 911. I gave them a description of the truck: white cargo truck, black cab with some Pennsylvania company logo on it, and the driver was a balding, middle-aged tan guy with a dirty blue t-shirt. They advised me to pull off to the emergency shoulder on the left, but I had never done that and it looked too narrow, so I didn't feel comfortable doing that. At this point, he was passing someone else in the middle lane, and I finally had a chance to slow down and merge 2 lanes over to the rightmost lane. I started speeding past him so he couldn't trap me again. The operator told me to take the closest service plaza about 5 miles away. She said he probably wouldn't follow me, so I could stop there for a few minutes before getting back on the highway. She told me to call if he did follow me, but she was confident he probably wouldn't, so she hung up. Now he's still holding up the sign and smiling this creepy, increasingly perverted grin at me while I avoid eye contact. The service plaza is in a quarter mile, and I'm not using any turn signals, but I guess he knew what I was doing because he braked hard and merged behind me right at the last second to join me in exiting to the service plaza. After I got my heart to start back up from the coronary area just experienced, I called 911 again. The way this service plaza was set up was that semi-trucks had to use a separate lane winding to the right of the plaza that led to a parking lot behind the plaza just for big trucks. The rest of us used a smaller lane to park immediately in front of the plaza. I parked, and as I'm explaining to the new operator what's going on, I watched the semi creep around its path while the driver stared me down, smiling. I freaked out. He knew where I had parked. He knew where to find me. If I just stayed there, I thought maybe I could have floored it to get back on the highway, but I was afraid he would see me and follow me again. So, I drove to a gas station to the left of the plaza, which had a view of the semi-truck parking lot, hoping he wouldn't find me until the police came. The operator transferred me to the woman who was helping me before. She informed me that they had dispatched a couple of police cars but couldn't tell me how long they would be. I saw the trucker had gotten out of his truck and was heading towards me. Even though my windows were closed and my doors were locked, I was panicking on the phone with the operator. She told me the police should be there soon and that I should be safe there, so I should sit tight while I kept her updated. I wanted to at least drive back to the parking lot I was in before, but it was a one-way entrance to the gas station, so I couldn't. I glared at the trucker and showed him my phone when he came close. He finally stopped smiling and made it look like he was going into the service plaza. I looked in my right side view mirror and found him hiding behind a big white pillar in front of the plaza, staring at me again. I freaked out and asked the operator where the cops were and if I could leave because he was being ultra creepy. She told me to sit tight again because they should be there any minute, so I did. Then he came out of hiding and started walking towards my truck. I put it in drive just in case and told the operator what he was doing. I refused to make eye contact with him but kept watching my mirrors to make sure I knew where he was. The smile was back, and he started walking in circles around my truck, looking at it as if looking for a way to get in. I couldn't take it anymore. I waited until he circled back behind me, floored it, and told the operator I wasn't waiting one more second for the police. She apologized and told me the police would look for the man and talk to him if they found him, and that I should focus on getting home safely while keeping an eye out for him. I don't know if they did that or not, but I know none of that would have happened if I had my boyfriend with me. So not only can't I walk alone, but I also can't drive alone as a female. Nice to know. I've worked in manual labor my entire life, but I took a gig hauling trucks for a few years in the early 2000s. I got an offer for a package that I couldn't refuse in the way of full-time pay with part-time hours if I could meet the arrival times. I got insurance benefits, everything an employee dreams about. I got my commercial driver's license as well as a few other certifications, and found myself on the road just a month or so later. I had a lot of jobs where things got weird or just crazy, but one particular evening makes the others pale in comparison. I don't like stories with a lot of fluff, so I'm just going to jump right into it. I was on a return trip from Oregon to Minnesota. I had already made one delivery, hooked up a second, and was now technically on my way home. This was about the halfway point. Weather was great, I was feeling good and motivated. My time on that trip was well ahead of schedule, so I made sure not to push it or burn myself out. I found it super defeating to get home from a long haul and be too exhausted to enjoy it. It's always better to take a little time and stay level. I also have a bit of a heart condition, so heavy caffeine intake isn't an option for me. Most of my life has been all natural, using whatever remedy I could come up with to keep my energy up. The biggest influence was just a good diet, exercise, and a consistent sleep schedule. That means I stopped every night generally at the same time, got a good amount of rest, and that's it. Many of my trips were clocked to the very last second, but I managed to always arrive on time. I passed over the Idaho border and started gunning through Montana. Lots of beauty, but ultimately not much in the way of civilization out there. The route took me through Missoula and some more established townships. Between them, though, you'd be lucky to find a service station of any kind. Rural stretches like this always kept me on my toes, as I'd heard horror stories about guys running out of gas, blowing tires, or encountering engine trouble. There isn't help for 75 miles in each direction. On top of that, some of these rural stretches don't see a lot of traffic. Some early mornings, I wouldn't see another car on the road for an hour at a time. I had my eyes set on a trucking station out in the middle of nowhere between Bozeman and Livingston. I'd roll through Bozeman around dinner time, grab a quick bite to eat, then push on towards the station. I'd let my food settle and digest a bit. After an hour of driving, I'd hit my target, pull over, and be totally ready for bed. I liked routine, structure, and having a plan. That night, everything was supposed to be simple. At first, it was. My plan was going smoothly. I got dinner, gassed up, experienced little to no traffic, and was back on the road in no time. Soon, I found my head swimming from the digestion and long day of driving. But there it was, some lights out there alongside the highway. You know exactly what I'm talking about, those big concrete pullouts on the side of interstates every 100 miles or so. They usually have a bathroom, vending machine, trash cans, everything people living on the road might need. I pulled in and found a rare sight, not a single vehicle anywhere. No one was using this rest station, and I liked that. There's a kind of security in being solo, if that makes sense. I let the truck cool down, locked everything up, then crawled into the living space in the back. My area was very simple, a bed, small table attached to the wall, and an overhead shelf to store most of my belongings. I also had a little makeshift power cell which I used to charge a portable flip DVD player that had both the player and the screen. It was one of those inventions of the 2000s that could have only been popular then. I settled in with my big blankets and pillows and watched one of my favorites, Resident Evil or Reign of Fire, an action thriller of some kind. Despite the shooting and explosions, I fell asleep just after 30 minutes. I closed the DVD player and surrendered to the darkness inside my cab. It must have only been a couple hours later when something woke me up. I couldn't place it, but I knew something jarred me. I have a habit of snoring occasionally, and when I do, I sometimes wake myself up with one of those louder rips. I thought maybe that's what happened, so I snuggled in for a few more hours of sleep. I like to hit the road before sunrise and get those extra miles in before the rest of the world wakes up. Just as I closed my eyes though, I heard it, the sound that woke me up. It wasn't a snore like I thought, but the abruptness of a cough. It came from somewhere beyond the cab, outside in the parking lot. It sounded partially muffled, maybe another trucker had pulled in and I just simply hadn't heard the rumble. Really didn't seem that likely, but I guess anything is possible, right? I wanted to be sure of what I heard, so I turned on the small overhead light. The second that flicked on, I could hear shoes slapping the asphalt and the sound of someone running away. As I listened, the footsteps faded a bit. The person was running away from my truck. They must have seen the light come on and reacted to that. But at this point, I'm now on high alert. I turned the light off so as not to give away my position within the truck. As long as it's dark, it's almost impossible to see in the depth of the sleeping cab, so I used that to my advantage. Looking out, I surveyed the parking lot and found something unusual, an older van parked across the lot, sitting angled so the broadside faced my windshield. Definitely weird, as I was 100% alone when I pulled in originally. That parking lot was empty. I tried to be reasonable though. Maybe he was walking his dog, having a smoke. Whatever the case, the person was likely a long-haul traveler just like myself. The guy was probably stretching his legs, doing a few laps of the parking lot when he accidentally woke me up. Once he saw the light, he realized that he made a mistake, then hightailed it back to his van. It really wasn't the most out-of-the-ordinary thing to happen at a truck stop. With a little apprehension, I let everything go and didn't investigate it any further. Despite my best efforts, I couldn't fall back asleep. Just as I started to drift off, I heard those footsteps again, and then what I thought sounded like someone tugging on the passenger side door handle. There was an unmistakable click, then the sway of someone stepping off the sidebar. Whoever I'd heard coughing was just trying to get inside my truck. At this point, all my alarms are going off in my head, and that structured, well-planned part of my brain is now scrambling. For whatever reason, and a lot of my friends have given me flack for it over the years, I didn't carry a gun on these truck hauls. I did have a short club that I used to check my tire pressure, and that was a great second option. At this point, I believed my best choice was to nut up and confront whoever was milling around the parking lot, let them know that my truck wasn't public property. All at once, I threw the passenger door open and clicked my flashlight on. I had a small, steady streamlight that could reach something like 30 yards, not with the puffy yellow flare of a cheap flashlight, but with a white, concentrated light. I swept it back and forth, saw nothing, so I started inspecting the truck and the trailer. I saw nothing at first glance, so I hopped down and did a full lap of the rig. Still nothing, not even underneath it. Only one option left now, time to go look at that van. I swept the flashlight around and started marching up to the rear. I wanted to see the license plate before I checked it out any further. As I went to eye the back of the bumper, I brought my light up so I could see. My eyes naturally went to the license plate, which was from South Dakota, but something else caught my attention. I couldn't place it at first, but as I kept looking, it all came into focus. Below the back of the van, near the far back tire, there was a pair of boobs. Someone was crouched and hiding on the other side of it. Only the toe tips poked out, but it was enough for me to see what was going on. I left the light on the boots for 10 to 20 seconds, long enough for them to realize that they were exposed. I watched in disbelief as the boots slowly shuffled backward until they were completely hidden behind the tire. My stomach soured at the whole thing. This person clearly had ill intentions, and I wanted nothing to do with them. I wanted to say something, but I found myself completely speechless. I'm not confrontational. You may have gleaned that from my lack of a firearm. I didn't want to issue a threat to someone who might have the upper hand. I just backed up until I reached my truck, hopped in, and locked the door. I figured that encounter was enough. I got out and found them, who would come up and keep messing with me. We both knew what was going on at this point, so the mystery was completely over. Just some vagrant weirdo looking to make a score. Now that he knew the truck wasn't abandoned, I hoped that he would just move on. I sat for 45 minutes, and that van never moved. I didn't see anything move, no person, no door opening or closing. It's like they were still hiding behind that rear passenger tire. As the morning went on, though, sleep came and kissed me, and I knew I needed to get at least a couple more hours of rest if I wanted to have a successful day. My eyes started to droop, and soon I was snoozing. The sound that woke me this time was clear, loud, and right outside the door. It was the sound of a man clearing his throat, the sound someone makes when they want your attention. My eyes shot up, and I moved to the glass, and there, just peeking over the lip of the door, I can see someone looking into my cab. I freeze, hoping they can't see me, but it doesn't matter. This guy's eyes are rolling back and forth, taking it all in, looking for whoever is inside. He looks crazy, like he'd given himself a haircut with a butter knife. Some of it was shaved, some of it was long, and I could see nicks along his scalp. I think his eyebrows were shaved off too, but it was hard to tell in the moonlight. I could literally feel this guy pulling on the door handle, making the entire truck move. I did the only thing that I could think of, shout as loud as I could. "What do you want?" I hollered at the glass, still motionless in the back of the cab. This is also a censored conversation, as I remember swearing in literally every sentence that I spoke to this guy. He said, "It's me." "Who?" I asked. Okay, maybe this was a case of a mix-up. I sat up and reached for the club on the floor. "It's Henry, come on," he pleaded. "I don't know you. I'm not from here. Now please just get away from my truck," I explained to him. The conversation devolved from that point forward. Playing hard to get. I like it. "Let's do something different," he said. This guy went on at length about what he wanted to do to me. None of it involved violence at all. Everything this guy said was sexual from start to finish. I'm watching this guy lick the window of my semi as he tells me he wants to kiss my feet, worship me, pleasure every part of me. I'm not homophobic, but the whole thing was nauseating. As he's going on and on and on about his sexual fantasies, transitioning into what he wants me to do to him, I'm yelling for him to just please go away. Throughout the entire thing, his tone changes. He starts talking about his desires, which were much more violent. This guy wanted someone to hurt him during their sexual escapades, punched, choked, tied up, and abused, the whole shebang. I couldn't really believe what I was hearing. He switched from licking the window to tapping on it before finally smashing his fist into the glass. I had to do something. I remembered my portable DVD player and, for whatever reason, came up with this weird little plan. I opened it up and faced it away from the front of the cab so the light would illuminate my face, but he wouldn't be able to see what the light was coming from. "I'm calling the police," I said, hoping the light source would look like a car phone or a radio. "I've got your South Dakota plates too." "Nathan?" he asked. "I'm not who you're looking for." "Now get the hell out of here, man," was the last thing that I ever said to this person. I watched him leap down and start running all in one swift motion. The van fired up and, without even turning its headlights on, fled from the parking lot like a bat out of hell. Honestly, I ended up doing the same. After another inspection of the trailer and tires to make sure everything was secure, I rolled out and made for Livingston. That morning, I really played with the idea of calling the police and making some kind of report, but thought it would be more trouble than it was actually worth. I didn't have the actual plate number, just that it was a Dakota van, so I figured my report would go absolutely nowhere. It wasn't until I got out of trucking that I realized how common this type of encounter was, especially after the invention of Craigslist. Truck stops have always been known for midnight rendezvous, but became explicit for random hookups all over the country, particularly for traveling men who wanted to experiment. Whoever that Henry guy was, he thought I was Richard, who was probably another trucker rolling through Montana that night. Henry must have gotten the truck station mixed up, or Richard was late to the arrival, so he got us confused. Regardless and whatever the case, I'm very glad that I had my doors locked that night, as I could be telling a very different story right now. Have a plan when you hit the road and always stick to that plan. Tale takes us deep into the darkest corners of the internet, where whispers of accursed games spread like wildfire through online forums and chat rooms. They called it the Grimoire, a text-based role-playing game shrouded in mystery and whispered rumors of misfortune and despair. Legend had it that the game was the creation of a reclusive programmer, a digital recluse who had poured his darkest fears and obsessions into its code. But something went wrong. The game, once intended as harmless entertainment, became corrupted, twisted by an unknown force, its code taking on a life of its own. Rumors spread like wildfire through the online gaming community, tales of players experiencing strange phenomena, their real lives mirroring the events of the game with chilling accuracy. Some claimed to have lost fortunes, their in-game losses translating into real-world financial ruin. Others whispered of broken relationships, accidents, even disappearances, all linked to the game's malevolent influence. The game, it seemed, had a way of reaching out from the screen, of blurring the lines between the virtual and the real with terrifying consequences. Despite the chilling tales, curiosity got the better of many, drawn to the game's mystique like moths to a flame. Among them were two friends, Mark and Lucas, avid gamers with a penchant for the strange and unusual. They stumbled upon the Grimoire on a hidden forum, its download link buried beneath layers of cryptic messages and warnings. Intrigued and perhaps a little foolish, they decided to download the game, eager to experience its mysteries firsthand. As they installed the game, a sense of unease settled over them, the computer screen flickering erratically, the room growing noticeably colder. Ignoring the warning signs, they launched the game, its opening screen a jumble of distorted text and disturbing imagery that seemed to writhe and pulsate before their eyes. A single line of text appeared on the screen, its message chilling in its simplicity: "Welcome to the Grimoire. You have been warned." Undeterred, Mark and Lucas created their characters, their avatars appearing on the screen as pixelated representations of themselves, their features strangely distorted, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. The game world was a dark and unforgiving place, a labyrinth of shadowy forests and crumbling ruins populated by grotesque creatures and malevolent entities. As they progressed through the game, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, their every move scrutinized by an unseen presence. Strange things began to happen. This is something that happened to me when I was much younger. I believe I was about 11 or 12 during this time. I lived at home with my older brother and my parents. One of my favorite things to do after school most days was to unwind by playing some video games. I would go upstairs to my bedroom and start playing on my PlayStation 2 for a while. Sometimes, I would play all the way until it was time for dinner. So, one day I got home from school and went straight up to my bedroom to play some video games. Both my parents were still at work, and my brother was still at school. That's how things usually were for an hour or two after I got back on most days. I remember playing video games, and a little while in, I heard my brother getting home downstairs. The front door opened and closed, and I heard him walk inside. I thought nothing of it and I kept gaming. But about an hour later, I got a call from my mom. I had a home phone in my bedroom and saw through the caller ID that it was my mom's cell phone. When I answered, she told me that she was on her way to pick up my brother from his friend's house, and they would be home soon. My dad was going to pick up some food on the way home from work, and she wanted to know what I wanted. I told her whatever food it was that I was in the mood for that night. Then we said bye, and I hung up. It was only after ending the call that I realized it was strange that my brother was not home. If he was at a friend's house, then who had I heard entering our house? My heart started racing, and I had a terrible feeling. I carefully walked to my bedroom door and opened it up. I had never heard the person walking upstairs or near my bedroom. I didn't know where they went after entering the house. So, after not hearing or seeing anything, I left my bedroom. I quietly walked down the hallway and looked downstairs. I still saw nothing. Then I went down the stairs. Once there, I walked around the main level of the house looking. I did not see anybody, but when I was near the kitchen and kind of the front door, I heard a noise coming from the basement. It sounded like somebody was down there. I quickly ran away and went back upstairs to my bedroom. A short time after entering my room, I heard the front door to the house open and close again. At that point, I ran back downstairs. When I got to the front door, I saw what looked like a man walking away down the street. I didn't recognize him and only saw him for like 2 seconds. It might not have been the same guy who had been in the house, but I think it was. I then locked all the doors and called my parents, who then called the police. The door had been left unlocked for when my brother got home. I hadn't known he was going to a friend's house. Looking back, I can't believe it happened. I didn't even know I was home alone with some random guy downstairs. I'm really glad that he didn't go near my bedroom. This happened when I was like 16 and in my heavy gaming phase, still living with my parents. I played a lot of League of Legends in my room on my computer in those days, especially in the summertime when it's so unbearably hot outside and I preferred to stay inside in the air conditioning. Anyway, way back when I lived at home, I'd have the place to myself a lot because my parents traveled a lot and I was the last one to move out. If I recall correctly, this was on a Friday night or a night that school was out the next day because I was staying up late. After I got home from school, I submitted a paper that was due that night to get it over with. Then, I had to do some shopping afterward on my mom's orders since they'd be gone for a while. It was how I earned my keep in the house, according to my dad. They left cash for me to use. I always had to show them the receipt though so that I wouldn't just pocket any of the money. My mom gave me a shopping list, so I went to Whole Foods in my old Camry, my first car. Shopping took about an hour. While in the grocery store, this guy in line behind me started talking to me, and I don't know why. He made a comment about one of the things I was buying and just wouldn't stop, even as I was bagging my groceries. He kept talking to me, which I found weird. He wasn't paying attention to anyone else. I was still nice though. When it was time to leave, I said, "Have a good one," and left. I went out to my car in the parking lot, packed the trunk, then headed home. It was a scorching hot day as we were in early June. I wasn't looking to go out and do anything outside. Once I was done with everything I needed to do, it was dark out by now, so I got right on League of Legends on my computer and texted my friend David to get on as well. He joined my party, and we played some dual rank as we always did. I was using my noise-canceling headset. We were committed already to playing League of Legends all night and ranking up, so of course, I needed to take a break to make dinner at some point. Probably 2 hours into playing, I told David I was going to eat dinner and I'd probably be back on in an hour. He said he'd be back on later too. So with that, I took a break and made some pasta for dinner. The kitchen is downstairs, and my room is upstairs. While I was sitting in the kitchen eating, I knew for sure I heard a thump from upstairs. Did it sound like a footstep? I wasn't sure. It could have been any number of things, but the last thing I'd imagine it would be was a footstep. I did, however, go and lock the front door. Now, oftentimes for a while, I would leave the door unlocked just because my parents' house is in a good side of town, and I just never took the idea of a break-in seriously. It's something you hear about on the news, but don't think it'll ever happen to you. I went upstairs, and I don't know what I was expecting, but I said my brother Tristan's name into the hallway. I knew he wasn't supposed to be here, but I don't know. I heard a sound and I felt the urge to see if anyone was here. When no one answered back, I went back to my room and got back on League of Legends. I put my headset back on and texted David that I'm going back on. Shortly after, he came back on. We started playing again. A couple of games in, I looked to my left at the doorway of my room into the hallway. I don't know if something in my peripheral vision or some other sense felt something there, but I would leave the door open when I was home alone as my mom would tell me to. The hallway was dark except for the one little nightlight plugged into an outlet. My room shone blue from my wall lights. Some of the blue poured into the part of the hallway closest to my room. In between the crack of the door was total blackness. I couldn't see through it. I didn't think anything of it. After our next game, David said he was taking a leak and walked away. While we were in the lobby, I looked at my phone, then looked back out to the hallway, and I noticed something was different. Now I could see through the crack of the door into the hallway. My first thought was someone blocking it just minutes ago? By instinct, I spun my chair around to face the bed behind me, and there was a man sitting on my bed with his freakishly upright posture and his hands resting on his thighs. He almost looked to be smiling. I was so alarmed I jumped out of my seat onto the desk and crawled onto the desk, causing my monitor and basically everything else to fall off of it. I screamed, "What do you want?" and he started to actually smile now, showing his teeth like he was laughing. I ran out of the room into the hallway. I stopped halfway down the hallway and looked back at my bedroom door. I heard the springs of my bed lifting, and then the guy slowly walked into the doorway and stopped. He stood there. I once again yelled, "What do you want?" He then spoke in a stuttered, slow voice, asking if he could play too. I asked, "How did you get in here?" He stepped a few steps forward and pointed down the stairs. I assumed he was implying he entered through the front door. I was at a loss for what to do, so I ran down the stairs to the landline phone, as my cell phone was still in my room. I grabbed the phone and a kitchen knife and screamed, "You need to leave. I'm calling 911. I heard footsteps walking down the steps, and the last time I saw the guy was when he walked past the kitchen, looked at me, and then I heard him walking out the front door. I ran to slam it shut and lock it. For the first time ever, I was ashamed of myself for leaving the door completely unlocked. I held the phone for a few minutes, deciding whether to tell my parents. Ultimately, I did. My mom was concerned at first, then grew livid, so much so to the point that she put my dad on the phone. He told me to go through the house and make sure nothing was taken. I went through every room, and honestly, everything seemed in place. I said the man seemed like something was off about him. The man didn't seem overtly hostile, but something was wrong with him, and I don't know what his intention was. The image of him sitting on my bed and the realization that he was watching me through the crack in the door was haunting enough. This is a story I'm not proud of, mostly for my naivety. When I was in middle school and early high school, I didn't know how to talk to girls at all at school, but that's a lot of boys in middle school. I wasn't shy in general. I had friends and did normal things an 8th grader would do. I just had never kissed a girl or anything. Some of my friends at the time claimed they had already gone further than that with girls, and I was starting to feel pressure. But I was still having trouble approaching girls in that way. The mentality went from boys making fun of girls to suddenly liking them in a matter of like a year. I was a pretty big gamer in middle school and early high school. This was when I was in 8th grade. I was like 13. My voice was still probably a bit prepubescent sounding. It was 2009. I played a lot of console games and computer MMORPG games. My favorite console games at the time were GTA 4 and Call of Duty, and my favorite computer game was this MMORPG called Ganu. It was this online game where you would level up by killing monsters, and the more you leveled up, the higher level monsters and hunting grounds you'd be able to tackle. The online community in this game was very active, and there were tons of players. My older brother used to play it a little bit too. I played it more for sure though. I was in a guild and town and everything. I don't remember how it happened, but I befriended this female player who was a higher level than me. Her username was Pokemon. Anytime I'd sign in and she was on, she'd message me and vice versa. We would join parties together, which meant we'd share EXP on whatever monsters we killed, and we just chatted for hours. She knew a lot about me, including my age and my town, and some personal family details she would open up to me too. Eventually, she told me her name was Karina. It was weird feeling such a connection with a girl when really, I knew nothing about her appearance or her voice. It truly was like having a pen pal, but better. It was interesting enough that we both lived in Texas state. She lived about an hour from me. After a few weeks, or maybe even a month, we started talking about maybe meeting one day. To do this, though, we'd have to exchange numbers. At the time, I didn't actually have a cell phone yet. I only had an iPod Touch. However, I was able to download a texting app that allowed me to send messages to people with cell phones. Through this app, I was able to send her a picture of myself. It was definitely this cringy 8th grade boy selfie of me trying to look good looking. She called me cute, and then she sent back a picture of herself. She looked a couple of years older than me, like 15, which was the age she told me she was. Based on the picture, I found her very attractive. This was around the time our messages became more flirtatious and romantic. But we were both minors, so neither of us could just drive an hour away. However, she apparently had a solution for this. She told me her sister had friends that lived around me, and she could probably get a ride to me. This was exciting news for my little 13-year-old self. I wanted to wait for a day and night when my parents wouldn't be home, so I'd have the house to myself. This was about a week later, I believe. My parents were going to the Hamptons for the whole weekend, so it would just be my brother and me home. My brother was 18, so I asked him to please just go out for the night with friends so that I could be alone with Karina. I gave Karina my address and told her to come that Saturday whenever she wanted. She said she'd be coming a little later, like at night. She didn't give me an exact time. At that point, we still had never spoken on the phone. I still hadn't heard her voice. I was so nervous all day that I couldn't even play video games. I was busy cleaning my room, making things look cool, fixing my appearance, and even rehearsing things to say in the initial moments of meeting. Then I got a message from Karina saying she's here. I sprang up and ran to the front door. I looked through the peephole and didn't see anyone. She then said, "You can come out to the front door." I opened the door and stepped onto the front porch. I looked around, and the street was dark and quiet, no cars, no people. I went back inside and shut the door. I messaged her back saying, "I don't see you." She replied, "Oh, I must have the wrong house. Give me a minute." That was a bit weird. I locked the door and sat on the living room couch, nervously waiting and playing games on my iPod. I got a message from her again. She said she's here and to come outside. I replied, "Ring the bell so I know you're at the right house." Then the doorbell rang. My nerves really set in. I walked to the door, looked through the peephole, and didn't see anyone. I said, "Karina." Through the peephole, I saw a hand reach towards the door and knock. I said, "Karina," again as I kept looking through the peephole. Everything felt like it instantly crumbled on top of me as this bald, creepy-looking short guy stepped in front of the peephole and then said through the door, "Hey, it's Pokemon. I want to talk." I ran away from the door with my hands over my mouth, truly speechless. The person I'd been talking to all this time was a creepy grown man. I was disgusted and scared. I went to call my brother's cell phone. He didn't pick up. The doorbell kept ringing. I went to my bedroom and locked myself in. I held the house phone in my grasp, considering calling my parents but too embarrassed to do so. My room was the only other room in the house with the lights on. I have a big window in my room that overlooks the whole side yard of our corner house. I turned off my lamp and slightly kinked the blind just a crack, and I saw that guy on the other side trying to look in. He started to knock on the window and said through the closed window how much of a connection we clearly have and that we could at least be friends. I responded with nothing. I called my brother again, and he picked up this time. I said, "Please come home right now." The Karina person was a grown man the entire time, and he's at my window right now. My brother's always been pretty big, even as a teenager. I'd feel safer with him being here. He said he was coming home with his friends right now. We stayed on the phone so I could tell him if anything happened. I ran to my parents' bedroom upstairs and hid there. The man was blowing up my message app, saying he would like to talk and that there was a reason he had to lie about who he was. When my brother got home, he told me he saw the guy outside. My brother and his 3 friends confronted the creepy short man outside. I went outside then to watch the 4 of them intimidate the man, calling him a sicko. The man's defense was that he was concerned for my well-being, inviting strangers from online over, and that this was supposed to be a learning lesson. I refuted this claim by asking him why he would say that we could be good friends at my window when my brother and his friends started pushing the man. He started quickly walking to his car. My brother kicked the guy's tail light while one of his friends threw a rock at his window. He sped off down the road, never to be seen again. This was humiliating and disturbing, but at the same time, I was really grateful for my brother and his friends coming to my aid. They potentially saved me from a seriously sick creep breaking into the house. It's still painful and uncomfortable realizing all that time I spent opening up to who I thought was a girl my own age on a game was some creepy grown man with a different agenda. Our first story begins on a Friday night, the air thick with anticipation. A young man named Jack, an avid gamer, scoured online marketplaces for a deal on a used console, eager to dive into the latest releases. He stumbled upon an offer that seemed too good to be true, a current-gen console, practically brand new, being sold at a fraction of the retail price. The seller, only identified as KL, was vague in his responses, claiming he simply needed to get rid of it. Despite a prickle of unease, Jack dismissed his better judgment and arranged to meet KL at a dimly lit gas station later that evening. The seller, a gaunt man with nervous eyes, arrived in a beat-up car, the console hastily wrapped in a garbage bag. He practically shoved it into Jack's hands, eager to be rid of the device. Jack, his excitement overriding his apprehension, paid the man and hurried home, eager to boot up his new purchase. As he connected the console to his TV, he noticed an unsettling detail he had overlooked in his haste, a single deep scratch etched across the top of the console, almost resembling a cryptic symbol. Brushing it off as nothing more than cosmetic damage, Jack grabbed his controller and prepared to enter a world of digital entertainment. From the moment he pressed the power button, things felt off. The console whirred to life with an unnatural hum, the fan noise louder and more erratic than it should have been. The screen flickered, displaying distorted images and garbled text before snapping into focus, revealing the console's home screen. But something was different. The usual cheerful background was replaced with a static image of a dark, desolate forest, the trees twisted and gnarled, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. Jack chalked it up to a corrupted hard drive, a minor inconvenience he could easily fix with a factory reset. As he navigated the console's menu, he noticed strange glitches, the cursor moving on its own, selecting options he hadn't chosen. The console seemed to have a mind of its own, its actions becoming increasingly erratic and unsettling. Unease curdled in his stomach, but Jack, determined to make his new purchase work, continued to tinker with the settings, attempting to restore the console to its factory settings. His efforts were met with resistance, the console seemingly fighting back, the screen flashing with disturbing imagery, grotesque figures with hollow eyes and gaping maws flickering in and out of existence. Cold dread washed over Jack as he realized that this was no ordinary glitch. Our next tale takes us back to the neon-lit golden age of arcades, a time when joystick warriors battled it out for high scores and bragging rights. In the bustling heart of the city, nestled between a dingy pizzeria and a flickering neon sign promising adult entertainment, stood the Pixel Palace, a haven for gamers seeking an escape from reality. Among the flashing lights and the cacophony of blips and bleeps stood a machine unlike any other, its faded paint and flickering screen whispering tales of a bygone era. This was Dark Carnival, a game shrouded in mystery and whispered rumors, said to be haunted by the spirit of a former player. The legend went that a young man named Ben, a regular at the Pixel Palace, had become obsessed with Dark Carnival, spending every waking moment at the arcade, his fingers flying across the joystick, his eyes glued to the screen. He poured his allowance into the machine, determined to conquer its fiendishly difficult levels. After weeks of relentless gameplay, Ben finally achieved his goal, his initials flashing proudly at the top of the high-score screen. But his triumph was short-lived. As he celebrated his victory, a surge of electricity, a freak accident, seared through the machine, striking Ben down where he stood. Some say Ben's spirit, unable to leave the game he loved, became trapped within the machine, his digital ghost forever bound to the arcade cabinet. And so the legend of Dark Carnival grew, whispered among the regulars, a chilling tale of obsession and the insatiable hunger for the high score. Most dismissed it as an urban legend, a spooky story meant to deter players from hogging the machine for too long. But there were those who claimed to have witnessed strange occurrences firsthand, the screen flickering erratically, the game playing on its own, the faint sound of laughter echoing from the speakers, a chilling melody that sent shivers down their spines. One evening, a group of friends, their laughter echoing through the arcade, gathered around the Dark Carnival machine, their competitive spirits ignited. Among them was Tony, a skeptic by nature who scoffed at the stories surrounding the game. "It's just an old machine," he declared, "nothing more than wires and circuits." His friends, a mix of believers and those who enjoyed a good scare, exchanged nervous glances as Tony deposited a coin into the machine, the screen bursting to life with a burst of static. As Tony navigated the game's opening levels with ease, his skepticism began to waver. The game seemed to anticipate his every move, the enemies reacting with an almost unnatural precision, as if controlled by a sentient force. One of my favorite hobbies has always been playing video games. When I was younger, I used to do a lot of console gaming, but in recent years, I've done most of my gaming on the PC. So, I have a setup in my bedroom in the apartment that I currently live in. It's in one corner of the room opposite my bed. Several weeks ago, I was having a gaming night with a friend. We both logged on at probably a little after 8 p.m. I was at my apartment, and he was at his apartment, so we were just gaming online. We were going to go until we got tired. I live alone in my small one-bedroom apartment, which is kind of old and on the first floor of the building. After playing online for several hours, neither of us were tired yet. At this point, I'm guessing it was around 11 p.m. That's when I thought I heard a knocking at my window behind me. I had my headset on, which is mostly noise canceling, so I couldn't hear that well, but I looked back to the window. It's probably like 15 feet from my desk and the chair I was sitting in. When I looked, I thought I saw what appeared to be a man moving away from the window. The window looks out to a small grassy area behind the apartments. Then there's a fence between the next property and the little woods before another apartment complex. In all my time living here, I had never really seen anybody out walking back there or anything, so this was kind of strange and also suspicious. The total time that I saw the guy was less than a second, though he was already moving away when I turned around and looked. I told my friend I would be back in a minute, and then I got up. I then walked over to the window and looked out of it. It was pretty dark in the little space back there, but I could see a little bit. However, I did not notice anyone there. I then left my bedroom and walked out to the kitchen, which also had a window looking out to that same general area. This had a broader view, but I still didn't see anyone. I figured that the guy was gone. This situation was kind of weird, especially with it being late at night. My only good explanation that I could think of was that possibly the man accidentally went to the wrong apartment window. He could have been trying to get somebody else's attention who he knew. I then went back to my gaming chair and sat down. I told my friend about what had happened. We chatted about it for a while and decided that it probably wasn't a big deal. However, probably 30 minutes after this or so, I remember looking back to the window. My headset was still on, so I don't remember if I heard anything or if I was just randomly turning around. When I did, though, I saw a man standing at the window. He was looking in. Because of it being dark outside, I did not really see any details of the man's face or what he looked like. Instinctively, I quickly got up from my chair. When I did, the man moved out of sight from the window. I then walked out of my bedroom into my small hallway with just a bathroom and a closet. Then to the right is the living room. It just felt safer to be away from that window. Moments later, before I returned to my bedroom or really did anything, I heard a noise. I was standing in the hallway, and there were a few sort of loud banging noises from my bedroom window. It seemed like possibly the man was going to try to break in. I heard several more loud bangs on the window, and I worried that it would break. I walked over to my door and left my apartment, going into the hallway. Then I called the police. I told them about what happened and said that I thought a man was breaking in. While I waited for the police, I went to the lobby of the apartment building near the front. I felt much better being away from my unit. The police got there minutes later. They searched my apartment and behind it. When I returned to my place, I saw that my window was actually broken and the man had gotten in. Several things were messed up. I was also missing several items. However, the man was able to escape before the police got there. At the end of the day, I was just glad that I left before he broke in. With the window being broken, I went and stayed at a friend's house for the night. The window got repaired the next day. Though I'm mad about having several of my things stolen, it was not even $100 worth of stuff. I am, however, sort of concerned that something like this will happen again. I still live in the same apartment, but luckily, nothing like this has happened since. A few years ago, I used to play video games and stream them online. I was not really popular or anything, I just did it for fun. I would stream on Twitch for my friends, and usually anywhere from 1 to 3 or 4 of them would watch. Sometimes they would play with me in the games as well. Every now and then a few other random people would watch the stream too, but I never got more than like 10 viewers at once. I wasn't trying to become famous or anything. One night, I was streaming Fortnite. It was almost a nightly thing for me to do at the time. I was playing with my friend Luck, who was also watching the stream. I remember that at one point, I saw there was another viewer, and soon the new viewer started talking in the chat and leaving comments. I did not recognize the username to be any of my friends, and I realized it was a new person. I said hi to them and welcomed them to the stream. The person responded, saying hi, but a short time later, their comments turned bad. It started with basic insults, calling me names and cursing at me. I assumed it to be some teenage kid just messing around on a Twitch account. I remember asking on the stream why he was so angry. My friend was thinking that it was really funny, though. The comments then got threatening. The user said something like they were going to find me and they knew where I lived or something along those lines. Obviously, I didn't take the threat very seriously. I really had no idea why they would act this way because my stream was always pretty fun and lighthearted. The first comment the person made that really raised my eyebrows, though, was when they mentioned my real name. They said they knew my name, and when I asked what it was, the user commented it. This shocked me because my name was not my username or anything, and this person knew my last name as well. It was then that I figured it had to be one of my friends messing with me, and that's what Luck thought as well. I remember Luck asking who it was, going through a list of friends that he thought it could be. The person denied it all. After going back and forth for a bit, the person eventually left, and I ended the stream a short time later. But the very next night, the person was back. I went back on what I usually did and was playing Fortnite again. Luck also joined, and it was just the two of us like the night prior. Well, maybe 30 minutes into the stream, the mystery person returned. They started commenting again, picking up right where they left off, but this time they said they were going to my house. I was kind of like, okay, buddy, let's see it, and still not taking it seriously. They went quiet in the chat for a while, but then out of nowhere, the person commented that they were at my house. Then I heard this loud knocking coming from the front door. I lived in a house that I rented with a roommate during this time. My roommate was gone at work, and I was at home by myself. After I heard the knocking, I told Luck about it, who seemed shocked. This definitely had to be a friend, I said. I was getting up and went over to go look. After leaving my bedroom and starting to enter the living room, I could see somebody through the front window. There was a man standing on the front step who was wearing all black and a ski mask. He did not resemble any of my friends, but I guess it could have been one of them. I just had a bad feeling about it, though, like this was somebody else. I went back into my bedroom and asked the guy through my stream what he wanted. He did not respond to this, but loudly knocked again on the front door. I was not going to answer it. The mysterious man then made a comment that he hated my car. I don't know why he said this, but then he left the stream. I really had no idea as to what was going on. Me and Luck talked about who it could be, and I told him that I thought it was someone totally random. Luck was telling me that I should go out and confront the guy. Eventually, I left my bedroom to go check, but the guy was gone now. I looked out of every window and didn't see him. Well, the next day, I was leaving for work. When I got to my car in the driveway, there was a big dent in the driver's door, like somebody had hit it with something. I remembered the comment the guy made about hating my car, which is a Pontiac Aztec. Now I knew none of my friends would go so far as to damage my vehicle. After that, I decided to stop streaming for a while. I told all my friends about it, and like I expected, none of them knew who it could be. It remains a mystery to me to this day. I don't live in that house anymore. I did stream on Twitch again a while after it happened, but the guy never joined another stream or at least never said anything. This is one of the craziest things that's ever happened to me. At night, I like to play video games as a hobby quite a bit. This is my scariest experience while doing so. I remember that I was playing online on some game with random people. I had a headset and would talk to them. Most of you know that in online gaming, people sometimes say some crazy stuff, but on this night, it seemed pretty tame. I remember towards the end, shortly before I would go to bed, I was starting to get tired. I was playing this one game with basically just one other person. It was a man, and we were talking about the game over our headsets. During the game, I remember he asked me some somewhat personal questions. I didn't think too much of it and figured that he was just making conversation. The things he asked me were what my name was, to which I only gave my first name, and where I was from. I only told him my state, and I'm pretty sure I asked him the same questions back, but I honestly don't remember his answers. There wasn't anything really that creeped me out or anything. There were maybe a few more questions, but nothing that stood out. I remember that after a while, I got tired, and I told him that I was getting off. I do remember him asking why, and I said that I was going to bed. Afterwards, he sent me a friend request on the game, which was not a big deal. But it was either the following day or the day after that, he sent me a friend request on Facebook. I did not know it at the time, though. When I would go on Facebook, I would accept most friend requests unless it was clearly a bot. This guy appeared real, and I accepted it, not knowing who he was at all. He started to message me a short time later. I remember he said hi and asked me what I was doing and stuff as if we were friends. I asked him who he was and he responded, saying we had played video games together a few days earlier. That's when I realized this had to be the same guy. Obviously, I had no idea what the guy looked like. When I heard this, I was surprised that he had found me on Facebook. I never told him my last name or the city that I was from. It kind of creeped me out. Plus, based on the guy's page and photos, he did seem pretty weird. I decided at that point to delete him as a friend. But the day after that, the guy followed me on Instagram. He then started messaging me there. He asked me why I deleted him and sent me like 4 other messages. When I saw them, I deleted and blocked him from Instagram as well. I thought that was the end of it, but a couple of days later, I got a text message from him out of nowhere. An unknown number texted me. When I looked, I figured it was a wrong number until the texter said their name, and it was a long, angry text about how I blocked him and stuff. This creeped me out more than anything. I blocked his number and hoped that I would stop hearing from him. Obviously, I deleted him from being friends on the game as well. After this, I did stop hearing from him. I still wonder, though, how he found me. I mean, the only thing he had to go off of was my first name and state. How did he find my number? My only thought is that he possibly messaged somebody who knew me on Facebook, claiming that he was my friend and wanted to know my number or something. I never asked around, so I can't confirm it, though. Either way, it's really creepy what he did, and I'm glad that I haven't heard from him since. It took place back when I was in high school. I was, I believe, a junior during this time and loved to play video games. I had a good friend at school named Noah, who I would game with almost on a nightly basis. We would hang out all the time as well, and he lived just a few blocks over. On this night, we were playing video games online on our PlayStation 4s. I was at my house, and he was at his. We had headsets so we could talk to each other as we were on. I remember that after playing for a while, Noah said, "What was that?" It kind of came out of nowhere, and I assumed that he was just talking about the game. I asked him what and he didn't answer me at first. Then all of a sudden, he said, "What the?" and it kind of abruptly went quiet. I heard some other noises but couldn't make them out. I didn't know what was going on. I asked Noah what he was doing, but he did not answer me. Everything was silent for a while. After, I sent Noah a Snapchat asking him what that was all about. I was really confused, but Noah did not immediately open it. So, I got curious and was kind of concerned. I decided to walk over to his place. Maybe he was playing a prank on me, but I felt like I should go ask him. We were such good friends, and it wasn't that weird for me to do that. So, I left my house at whatever time it was, probably like 10 p.m. It was dark out, and after walking a few blocks, I arrived at Noah's street. It was quiet, and we both lived in a pretty typical neighborhood for the most part. When I reached Noah's house, I wasn't sure if his parents were home or not because most of the lights in the house appeared to be off. I walked up to the front door and knocked on it. At first, there was no answer. It was very quiet. But a short time after knocking, I heard what sounded like somebody who may be in the backyard. After waiting a while, I knocked again. I couldn't see into the backyard from where I was. I continued to wait at the front door, wondering if I should investigate the noises I had heard in the back. Maybe Noah had gone outside, but I didn't really know why he would. Then finally, I heard someone walking towards the front door inside. The door then opened, and Noah was standing there. He looked very serious and told me to come inside quickly. I got in, and then he closed and locked the door. He said a man had been inside his house, and he was calling the police. He added that he thought the man just left. Noah went back and got his phone from his bedroom and dialed 911. He told me that his parents were gone, and he was home alone. We both waited for the police in his parents' room because it had a lock on it. Nobody else entered the house or was in it while we waited. The police got there shortly after and spoke to us. I guess what happened is when I was gaming with Noah, he heard a noise from behind his house. It sounded like the back door, which led to the kitchen, was opening. It must have been left unlocked or something because an unknown person did, in fact, enter. After hearing the footsteps, Noah ran to his closet to hide. He was able to hide but did not have his phone and couldn't call the police. Then I must have heard him running to his closet, and he said that he completely forgot about me on the headset. The headset was also not wireless, so he had to take it off to hide in his closet. While hiding, he heard the person walking around inside of his house. He hid all the way until I arrived at his place. When he heard the knock on the door, he said the man started walking around quickly and then left the house. I realized that I must have scared the guy off by knocking on the door. Noah was grateful to me for doing so. He then was able to leave, lock all the doors, get his phone to call the police, which was on the floor near his bed, and let me in the house. I don't know why the man entered the house or how he seemed to know that the door would be unlocked, but I'm really glad that I went over to Noah's. As a child growing up in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the local playground was a place of joy and laughter, a haven where my friends and I could escape the world's worries. But one summer day, that all changed. It started out like any other day, with sun shining brightly overhead and the sound of children's laughter filling the air, but as we played on the swings and climbed the jungle gym, a sense of unease began to settle over us. It was subtle at first, a feeling of being watched, of something lurking just beyond the edge of our vision. But as the afternoon wore on, the feeling grew stronger, until it felt as though we were being stalked by some unseen presence. As we ventured deeper into the playground, the atmosphere grew increasingly oppressive, the air thick with a sense of foreboding. And then, as we reached the old abandoned slide at the far end of the playground, we saw it, a figure, dark and shadowy, lurking among the rusted metal. With a cry of terror, we turned and fled from the playground, our hearts pounding in our chests as we raced home. But even as we reached the safety of our house, we could still feel the eyes of the creature watching us from the darkness, its malevolent presence lingering in the air like a foul stench. In the days that followed, the playground became a place of dread, its once cheerful atmosphere replaced by an aura of fear and mistrust. And though we never spoke of what we had seen that day, the memory of the haunted playground would stay with us forever, a chilling reminder of the darkness that lurks just beyond the borders of our reality. As a child, I always found attics to be mysterious places, filled with forgotten treasures and hidden secrets. But what I discovered in the attic of my childhood home would forever change my perception of those dusty, cobweb-covered spaces. It all started on a lazy summer afternoon, when my parents decided it was time to clean out the attic and rid of the clutter that had accumulated over the years. As we climbed the creaky stairs and pushed open the heavy attic door, a wave of nostalgia washed over me, mingled with a sense of trepidation at what we might find hidden in the shadows. The attic was a labyrinth of old boxes and forgotten relics, with dusty furniture and forgotten memories scattered among the cobwebs. As we began to sift through the detritus of years gone by, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that some unseen presence lurked just out of sight, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal itself. And then, as I reached the far corner of the attic, I saw it, a small, nondescript box tucked away behind a pile of old blankets. Curiosity getting the better of me, I reached out and opened the box, revealing its contents to the dim light of the attic. Inside were photographs old and yellowed with age, depicting scenes from another time. But as I looked closer, I realized that these were no ordinary photographs. They were images of my family, taken long before I was born, in a house that looked eerily similar to the one we were currently in. As I flipped through the photographs, a sense of unease settled over me, as if I was peering into a past that had been intentionally forgotten. And then, as I reached the bottom of the box, I found a photograph that sent a chill down my spine, a picture of a young boy standing in front of the same attic door, his eyes wide with fear. It was then that I realized the truth. The attic was haunted by the spirits of those who had come before, trapped in a liminal space between the past and the present. As I looked around at the dusty relics of a bygone era, I knew that I would never be able to forget the horrors that lurked within the forgotten attic of my childhood home. This happened when I was a young child, maybe around 7 years old. My parents had me late. My two older siblings are both at least 10 years older than me. I was woken up in the middle of the night by a commotion downstairs. It was my parents. I cracked my door open and heard them freaking out about something, though I wasn't sure what it was. I went to the stairway and stood at the top, calling down, "Mom, Dad." My mom came to the bottom of the stairs and said to me, "Go back to bed." I listened without asking any questions. I could tell they were stressed about something, though. I tried to go back to sleep when I heard the front door downstairs slam shut, followed by dead silence. I presumed they had left the house, but wasn't sure why. Either way, I listened to my mom and went back to sleep. I woke up again to sounds downstairs. It was the sound of the front door closing and then footsteps, but no talking. Naturally, I assumed they were back home and just being quiet so they wouldn't wake me up. I heard occasional steps and thuds from downstairs, drawers and cabinets being opened and closed, and I thought for sure I heard the fridge opening too. I thought it was my older brother Jethro. He's 10 years older than me and was already driving at the time, so him getting home late and rummaging through the fridge wasn't abnormal at all. These are all things I was telling myself, logical explanations for what I was hearing. Eventually, I heard footsteps coming up the stairs, getting louder and closer until they reached the top and made their way to my door. My door quietly and slowly opened. I didn't sit up or move, I just had my eyes open, facing the door as I was still lying down. There weren't any lights on outside of my room, so whoever was walking around was doing so in the dark. All I saw was a black mass at my doorway, resembling the shape of someone's head. I said every name, starting from Jethro to Mom to Dad, then I just asked, "Who's there?" They didn't reply, they just closed the door. I was left there, confused but mildly creeped out. I heard footsteps going downstairs. I was convinced it was my dad, now just coming to check on me after getting home, though I wasn't sure why he was ignoring me. I didn't hear anything from downstairs for a while. Curiosity got the better of me, and I went downstairs in the dark. I kept all the lights off as I approached the kitchen and froze at the doorway, noticing a tall figure standing right in the middle of the kitchen. I said, "Dad," assuming it was him based on the size of the person. A deep voice said, "Go back upstairs." I ran back up the stairs to my room, closed the door, and jumped under the covers. All I was thinking was why my dad's voice sounded like that. The reality of a stranger being in the house didn't dawn on my innocent little mind until a little later when I heard the front door opening and a commotion from downstairs again, voices of my parents. I went to the top of the stairway again and was shocked to see I was still awake. I asked what happened, and they told me that Jethro had a little accident but was going to be fine. I found out a month later that he had gotten into a car accident, driving in conditions he shouldn't have been driving in. My parents had gotten a call from the hospital and rushed to see him first thing, leaving me to sleep. I asked my dad if he had come in my room before, and that was when I learned that they had been gone for hours. My mom started freaking out, yelling at my dad because he had neglected to lock the door when they rushed out of the house. Me telling my parents about the person at my bedroom door and in the kitchen caused my dad to search the house with his gun and my mom to call the police. The last thing I remember was being asked by a police officer to give my story. My parents tell me they felt like morons having to explain to the cops that they left me alone and left the door unlocked. I don't think anything of value was stolen, even though whoever broke into the house clearly didn't have intentions of harming me. Having a complete stranger in your house is already a terrifying ordeal. Now imagine going through that at 7 years old. It was around 2012 to 2013. My brother was about 6 or 7 at the time, and we had just moved into a new house to be closer to school and for cheaper rent. It was a pretty nice house, all things considered. It even had a cozy fireplace for the winter. Anyway, my brother was really into Batman and had this Batman car that, if a button was pressed, made noises and lit up. It was basically his favorite toy, so he played with it often. Then one afternoon, he came inside from playing out back and told us he found something. Naturally, my mom and I asked what it was. It was a picture of a young boy, in the form of one of those tags you get if your parents paid extra for school photos. The picture was dirty and full of wear and tear, even to the point you couldn't see the year it was taken. We thought, okay, some parent lost their kid's picture, no big deal. Then my brother said something that confused me. "That's Magnus," he said. I looked at him with a facial expression that basically asked him to repeat himself. He did. He pointed at the picture and said, "This is Magnus. He's my friend." I slowly nodded my head as if I knew who he was talking about. The main reason this confused me is because my brother didn't make friends easily, and he had no friends that I knew of. This Magnus only came up once we had moved. I shrugged it off and figured he'd made friends with the next-door neighbors or something, and he somehow got the school picture as a keepsake. That night, around 2 a.m., when everyone in the house was asleep, I woke up to my brother talking. Naturally, annoyed, I walked into his room to tell him to go to bed or else he'd wake up our parents. It was weird because when I walked into his room, he was sitting up straight in his bed as if he was actually talking to someone and not just to himself or his toys. I told him to go to bed and went to bed myself. A couple of days later, my mom was talking to me about my brother and asked if I'd seen him get up at night. I said no, I'd woken up to him talking a few nights ago, but that was it. Why? She said he had been acting weird, but as usual, we both shrugged it off as him being a kid. Now, in my room, my bed was right across from my door. This meant if I turned over, I could see into the hallway right in front of me. One night, I woke up to use the bathroom, and since I was, and still am, very afraid of the dark, I left the hallway light on, knowing my dad would turn it off once he got up. I'd probably be asleep by then. I was lying in my bed, facing my door, when a sudden noise made me jump. It was my brother's damn Batman car making noises. I got up to tell my brother that he shouldn't be up this late playing. But when I got into his room, he was asleep in his bed, with the toy across the room on the floor still making noise. I walked over to it to turn it off and was finally able to go back to sleep. However, the following days, my brother wouldn't stop talking about Magnus. It was honestly starting to freak me out, so I went over to the neighbors' houses to the right and left of us. One house didn't even have kids, and the other was vacant. This started to worry me, but my dad said it was probably just an imaginary friend he came up with. I went along with it since I couldn't think of any other explanation. Almost every night, one of us, my mom, dad, or sister would say we heard my brother's toy making noise and had to go into the room to turn it off. I explained that I had to do it as well and once again brought up my brother talking to someone. One night, my dad swore up and down that the toy was probably motion activated. But when we bought it, there was no advertisement for motion activation. My sister and I were so unnerved by it that we started to sleep in my room together. I'm glad we did, otherwise, I'd probably write this off as a bad dream. My sister and I were talking, trying to keep each other calm and in good spirits, until we heard the dreaded noise of my brother's toy. We both looked toward my open door and into my brother's room, which was right across from mine. Our expressions turned to horror as we saw my brother's toy rolling past the door all on its own. We screamed and ran to our parents' room. They got mad at our brother, saying it was a cruel joke to play on us as we were already freaked out. What he said sent chills down my spine. It wasn't me. Magnus wanted to play. That night, the toy went into the trash, batteries taken out and all. My sister and I were relieved until the next day when my brother had the toy again. My parents accused him of getting it out of the trash, to which he responded, "Magnus got it for me." The toy was broken into small pieces and thrown away for the final time. My brother was obviously upset, but our parents got him a new Batman figurine, and everything was fine. It wasn't until about a week later, when we all felt that everything was okay now and that Magnus was gone, that something happened. My mom was cooking chicken breasts on the countertop with the George Foreman grill. She had come into the living room to ask us something, and then we all jumped as we heard a crash in the kitchen. We went in there to see the George Foreman grill halfway across the kitchen, as if it had been thrown. My mom swore it was nowhere near the edge, and my dad had no explanations. Nothing happened afterward, and we moved out about a year later. But to this day, I wonder if my brother's imaginary friend Magnus wasn't imaginary. When I was just 9, we moved to a new house in a different town. I was entering a new elementary school as a 5th grader, which is always tough starting out. It was a bit awkward, as all the kids already knew each other, and I was just some random kid entering the scene. In my elementary school, you were made to sit with the kids from your class during lunch. I remember it being really awkward the first few days. Kids are extremely judgmental around that age, and I was judged as the new kid, making it more difficult to make new friends. But during those initial days of being the new kid on the block, I actually met a few of the kids on the block. One of the kids was Roy, who went to a private school, so we went to different schools. We met while I was biking down the street, and he asked if I had just moved into the house on the corner. We started hanging out from there. Then, a few days later, I met Hank. Hank actually rang the bell one day and asked my parents for me. I was confused when my parents called me to the door and introduced me to him. He said he lived down the block and wanted to know if I liked video games. Of course, I said yes, and he invited me over to his house to play Grand Theft Auto, San Andreas. I didn't have that game but really wanted it, so I said yes. We walked to his house, which was literally the corner house at the opposite end of the block. Right away, I felt like the house looked less nice than every other house on the block. It was the same size as most, but it just looked run down and not taken care of. There was no grass. The front yard was just two big patches of dirt with a walkway cutting through them to the front door. We entered the house, and it was equally disheveled inside. It was like a house of hoarders, with boxes and junk everywhere in every room. He led us to the basement, which smelled like 15 cats lived down there. Weirdly enough, there didn't seem to be any pets. The basement was a pigsty. It may have been the messiest room in the house. We sat on this brown leather couch placed right in front of the TV. He had a GameCube and PS2. He booted up San Andreas, and we played the two-player mode. It was actually fun, and in that moment, I thought I was going to like Hank and would want to be friends with him. Eventually, I wanted to go home, so I said I had to go. He seemed really disappointed, like he wanted to keep hanging out. We'd already been playing for like 2 hours, so I just wanted to go home. He followed me halfway home until I said, "See you later," basically saying in a friendly way, "All right, go away now." That was the first warning sign. I remember this kid Hank who lived down the block from me. One day, he rang my doorbell and asked if I could come out and play. I recall thinking he was a bit of a weirdo, but I didn't find it concerning just yet. The next day, Hank rang the doorbell again and asked my parents if I could come play. This time, we played GameCube in my room for about an hour. To be honest, I was starting to not really like him. I felt like he was weird and made me uncomfortable with how physically close he got to me. The next day after school, he rang the bell again. I wasn't really in the mood, so I told my mom to tell him I didn't feel good. He left, and I was relieved. I would rather hang out with my friend Roy, honestly, because I just liked him more. That same day, I rode my bike up to Roy's house to see if he could hang out. He was down, so we started riding our bikes further up the block. This was a mistake because as we passed Hank's house, he came outside onto his front stoop as if he were waiting by the window. It was weird, and it was also awkward because I had just had my mom tell him I was sick before. As we passed, I told Roy that I had hung out with that kid and that I felt like he was slightly weird. Roy was shocked that I had hung out with him, saying that whole family was crazy. I found out from Roy that Hank was actually a couple of years older than me. He was 12. From this point on, I decided to steer clear of him. The next weekend, Hank came to our door again, asking for me. I had told my mom before this already to tell him I'm not home if he came back, so she did that. But late that night, I woke up to my window completely open and a cool breeze blowing into the room. It was a chilly September night, so I most definitely left the window closed originally. Waking up to an unexpected breeze made me question who could have done that. Then I felt something poke my foot, and I screamed. I looked at the foot of my bed and saw Hank. He told me to be quiet, it's just him. Before I could even ask what he was doing in my room, He explained that his parents were fighting and he wanted to sleep with me. He climbed through my window. I was in shock. I told him to get out, and he pleaded with me to let him sleep in bed with me. Again, I told him to get out. Watching him turn and climb out of my window was a disturbing scene. I closed the window and locked it, and then went straight to my parents to wake them up and tell them. They couldn't believe it. The next day, my parents both went down the block to talk to Hank's parents, and when they came back, they said it didn't go well. Hank's crazy mom screamed and laughed in my parents' faces, taking no accountability for her son's actions. I'm sure my parents didn't want to get police involved because Hank was just a kid. But however many nights later, I woke up to knocks at my window. I had my blinds closed, but I knew for a fact it was Hank. I didn't answer the knocks, which went on and on for like 5 minutes. I even heard an attempt at opening the window. I was actually scared. I remember my heart racing. Eventually, the knock stopped. I went to tell my parents, and they told me to just ignore it. I think they weren't as threatened because, like I said before, Hank was just a kid. It was probably a few days later when Roy and I, along with another kid I made friends with from school, were biking from my house down the block, and when we passed Hank's house, I saw him run to the window as we passed. He just watched. I told my friends about what happened, and they found it hilarious. One of my friends made a comment about how he sounds like someone who would live in a gross house like that. That night, for the final time, I woke up to a sound in my room. It was the sound of my window being shattered. I screamed as I saw Hank climbing through the window through the closed blinds. I ran to my parents' room and woke them up. By this point, Hank was already back outside. My dad went outside and chased him all the way back to his house, with Hank making it back inside before my dad could catch up to him. My dad pounded on the door until Hank's parents opened up, and my dad must have said something right because he somehow managed to convince Hank's parents to pay for the window if he didn't involve the police. They ended up paying whatever it cost to fix the window, and I never heard from Hank again. Though I did see him once or twice in front of his house the next couple of years while in the car passing his house. That family eventually ended up moving somewhere else, thankfully. I think there's a chance Hank was looking to do something crazy, like murder me or at the very least attack me, just because he saw me hanging with other kids when I didn't want to be his friend. I mean, what else would he do after shattering my window with something and climbing inside? I'm scared to wonder what kind of person Hank grew up to be. In the quiet town of Briarwood, nestled among the rolling hills, there stood an ancient willow tree. Its sprawling branches reached towards the sky like gnarled fingers, casting eerie shadows over the neighborhood playground. Children were warned to stay away from the tree, for it was said to be cursed. But for Audrey and her friends, curiosity overcame fear. Audrey was 7 years old when she first heard about the legend of the Whispering Willow. It was whispered among the kids at school, a tale passed down from older siblings and cousins. They said that if you stood beneath the tree at midnight and listened closely, you could hear the whispers of lost souls trapped within its ancient roots. One fateful summer evening, Audrey and her two best friends, Imelda and Patrick, decided to test the legend. Armed with flashlights and nervous laughter, they made their way to the playground where the willow stood sentinel in the moonlight. The air was thick with humidity as they approached the tree, its twisted branches swaying gently in the breeze. Audrey's heart raced in her chest as they huddled together beneath the willow's canopy. The playground was deserted, the only sounds the distant chirping of crickets. "Are you sure about this?" Imelda whispered, her voice trembling. Audrey nodded, her palms sweaty against the flashlight. "We have to do it together. On the count of 3. They took a deep breath, their anticipation palpable in the air. 1, 2, 3, Patrick exclaimed, and they switched off their flashlights, plunging themselves into darkness. For a moment, all was silent. Audrey strained her ears, hoping to catch a whisper, a murmur from the depths of the tree. Then, just as doubt began to creep in, she heard it, a soft, haunting whisper, like the rustle of leaves in the wind. It was faint at first, barely audible over the pounding of her heart, but as she listened, it grew louder, more insistent. "Help me, help me." The voice was plaintive, full of sorrow and despair. Audrey's blood ran cold as the words echoed in her mind. She could feel Imelda and Patrick tense beside her, their breaths shallow and ragged. The darkness seemed to press in around them, suffocating and oppressive. "We have to get out of here," Imelda whimpered, her voice barely above a whisper. But before they could move, something shifted in the shadows. A figure emerged from the darkness, its form indistinct and ghostly. It floated towards them, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. Audrey's scream pierced the night as the figure reached out a translucent hand, its fingers curling towards her. She stumbled backward, tripping over a gnarled root and falling hard on the ground. "Run," Patrick shouted, grabbing Audrey's hand and pulling her to her feet. They sprinted towards the playground's exit, their hearts pounding in their chests. Behind them, the figure gave chase, its eerie whispers growing louder and more urgent. "Help me. Don't leave me." They burst out of the playground, gasping for breath as they stumbled onto the quiet street. The figure was gone, but the echoes of its voice lingered in their minds. They never spoke of that night again, each too terrified to confront the reality of what they had experienced. The Whispering Willow remained a forbidden place, a dark reminder of the unknown terrors that lurked in the shadows. Years passed, and Audrey grew into a young woman, the memory of that night fading like a distant dream. But one summer evening, as she walked past the playground on her way home, she heard it, a soft, haunting whisper carried on the breeze. "Help me." Audrey's blood turned to ice as she glanced towards the willow tree, its branches reaching towards the darkening sky. In that moment, she knew that some legends were born of truth, and that the Whispering Willow held secrets that were best left undisturbed. In the quaint town of Willowbrook, nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, there was a house unlike any other. It stood at the edge of town, its weathered facade looming ominously over the neighborhood. Children whispered tales of its haunted past, claiming that the shadows within held secrets darker than the night itself. It was here that young grave digger spent his childhood, unaware of the horrors that awaited him within those walls. Grave was an inquisitive child, always eager to explore the world around him. His parents, both busy with work, often left him to his own devices, trusting the safety of their small town. One summer afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, casting long shadows across the lawn, Grave found himself drawn to the mysterious house at the end of the street with a sense of curiosity that outweighed his fear. Grave pushed open the rusty gate and ventured into the overgrown yard. Weeds tangled around his ankles as he made his way to the front door, which creaked open with an eerie groan, as if welcoming him inside. The interior was shrouded in darkness, the only light filtering through dusty windows. Grave hesitated at the threshold, a chill creeping up his spine, but something compelled him forward, deeper into the belly of the house. As he stepped into the dimly lit hallway, the air grew thick with a sense of foreboding. Whispers echoed off the walls, faint and indistinct, like the murmurs of a long-forgotten past. Graves' heart raced in his chest as he followed the sound, drawn to a staircase that spiraled upwards into darkness. With each step, the whispers grew louder, forming words that sent shivers down Graves' spine. "Leave," they hissed, "before it's too late." But Grave pressed on, driven by a morbid curiosity that overpowered his fear. At the top of the stairs, he found himself in a narrow corridor lined with closed doors. The whispers seemed to emanate from behind one in particular, its wood warped and splintered with age. Summoning all his courage, Grave pushed open the door to reveal a room frozen in time. Dust-covered furniture lay scattered about, cobwebs clinging to every surface. But what caught Graves' attention was the figure huddled in the corner, its back turned to him. "Hello," Grave called out, his voice trembling. The figure remained motionless, its form shrouded in darkness. Grave took a tentative step forward, his heart pounding in his chest. As he drew closer, he realized with horror that the figure was not human at all. It was a grotesque mannequin, its features contorted into a twisted mask of agony. In its outstretched hand, it held a faded photograph. Graves' hands shook as he took the photograph, his eyes widening in shock. It was a picture of a young boy, no older than himself, standing in front of the very house he now stood in. But what chilled him to the bone was the date on the back, the date of that very day, decades ago. Before he could comprehend the implications, the whispers around him grew deafening, a cacophony of anguished voices filling the room. "Help us," they moaned. "Free us from this place." Graves staggered back, his mind reeling with fear and confusion. Without a second thought, he turned and fled from the room, down the stairs, and out of the house. The echoes of the whispers haunted him every step of the way. When he emerged into the fading light of evening, he found himself in the overgrown yard once more. Gasping for breath, he stumbled towards the gate, desperate to escape the nightmare within. As he reached the gate, a sudden gust of wind slammed it shut with a resounding clang, sealing the house behind him. Grave looked back one last time, the house now looming like a dark specter against the twilight sky. From that day on, Grave avoided the house at the end of the street, the memory of the whispers and a haunting photograph etched into his mind forever. And though he grew up and left Willowbrook behind, he could never shake the feeling that something malevolent lingered within those walls, waiting for its next unsuspecting victim. To this day, the house remains untouched, a relic of a dark and tragic past. If you listen closely on quiet nights, you might just hear the whispers carried on the wind, a chilling reminder of the true stories that lie hidden within the shadows of childhoods long gone. As a child growing up in a small town nestled among dense woods, I often found myself drawn to the mysterious allure of the forest. But what I encountered there on one fateful day would haunt me for years to come. It was a warm summer afternoon, and my friends and I had decided to explore the woods behind our neighborhood. Armed with nothing but our youthful curiosity and a sense of adventure, we ventured deeper into the heart of the forest, eager to uncover its secrets. As we wandered among the towering trees and tangled undergrowth, a sense of unease began to creep over me. The air grew still, and the sounds of birdsong and rustling leaves were replaced by an eerie silence that seemed to hang heavy in the air. Ignoring my growing sense of dread, I pressed on, determined to uncover the truth behind the whispers that seemed to echo through the trees. But as we reached a clearing in the forest, the source of the whispers became clear. A dilapidated old house hidden among the trees like a forgotten relic of the past. As we approached the house, a chill ran down my spine, and I felt a wave of terror wash over me. The air was thick with a sense of malevolence, and the shadows seemed to dance with a life of their own. With trembling hands, I pushed open the creaking door and stepped into the darkness beyond. What I found inside would stay with me for the rest of my life. A room filled with decaying furniture and cobweb-covered relics of a bygone era. But it was what lay at the center of the room that filled me with terror. A child's doll, its eyes wide with a look of pure malevolence. And as I stared into those lifeless eyes, I felt a presence watching me from the shadows. A presence that seemed to hunger for something far more sinister than mere flesh and blood. With a cry of terror, I fled from the house, my friends close behind me. But even as we ran, I could still hear the whispers echoing through the woods, a chilling reminder of the horrors that lurked within. To this day, I cannot shake the feeling that something evil dwells within those woods, something ancient and malevolent that preys on the innocent and the unsuspecting. And though I have long since left that small town behind, the memory of that day will haunt me forever, a reminder of the darkness that lurks just beyond the edge of our reality. Nowadays, I don't camp nearly as much as I used to. I'm 24, and ever since I was young, I've been into hiking. Now, I get hiking isn't all that appealing to most people, but because of where I live, it's pretty easy to get into. You don't have to travel all that far for a pretty stunning scenic view. I try to find a new trail to hike every weekend. Typically, I'll hike alone, so I always keep a knife in my backpack for protection against wildlife. Should it ever come to that, though, in all my years of hiking, I've never once had to actually use it. In fact, I've never run into any dangerous situation while hiking. Well, at least up until a few days ago. I was driving to a heavily forested hiking trail I'd never been to before. Now, I hike in the afternoon, and this happened around the time of year where the days were starting to get shorter. In other words, the sun was setting earlier and earlier each day. This was a key detail that I had completely forgotten about prior to leaving. Only after I started driving to the place did I realize it would be completely dark outside before I would even be able to finish my hike. A decision I still regret making is deciding to do the hike anyway. I got a bad feeling about it right when I started. Fast forward a few hours, and I was now about 85% finished with the route I picked out. By this point, it was almost completely dark. I had a flashlight, but still, the whole scene was pretty eerie. This portion of the trail was deep in the forest. It was so dense with trees that the moonlight could barely even find its way through. Don't get me wrong, it was beautiful scenery in the day, but alone at night, it was nothing short of disturbing. It was then that I was really starting to regret my decision to carry out the hike. That's when I saw light up ahead on the trail. As soon as I shined my flashlight in its direction, it immediately got turned off. I didn't know what it was, but I couldn't exactly turn back, so I was pretty much forced to go directly towards where it had been. In the back of my mind, I knew the chances of it being another hiker in the dark were slim to none. Eventually, I reached where the light came from. There was no one. Instead, there was a large duffel bag lying on the ground. I began scanning the trees with my flashlight. That's when a large, probably 6.5-foot man stepped out from behind one of the trees. My body completely froze up. There I stood, like a deer in headlights, shining my light on the guy. He then slowly revealed a machete from behind his back. Seeing this, I started running for my life down the trail and in the direction of my car. I looked behind me, and the guy was chasing me. I dropped my backpack so I could run faster. When I finally reached a clearing in the forest and could see my car, I was still sprinting. I grabbed my keys from my pocket and unlocked it. I got inside, locked the doors, and had the engine on in less than 5 seconds. However, the guy was still behind me and was able to completely slash one of my back tires before I could drive off. I drove on an almost completely flat tire for the next 5 miles back to my house. Right as I pulled into my driveway, I called the police and reported the man. Although I have no idea if he was found, quite frankly, I have no idea if the police even searched for him. A part of me wants to go back to retrieve my backpack, which contains hundreds of dollars in equipment, but there's no way I can bring myself to do it. Plus, there's no guarantee it's still even there. For all I know, the guy went back and took it. I still don't know what I stumbled upon that night. This was by far the scariest experience I've ever had and the closest I've ever felt to death. In 2014, a man named Blair and his wife Farah were spending a weekend together on Vancouver Island, which they had done many times before. The couple has a lot of experience on the island and just camping in general. Vancouver Island provides an optimal camping setting because of its mix of scenic beaches and dense forest. The couple had many successful camping trips on the island until something truly terrifying happened to them on their final outing on the island. Blair and Farah were far from any roads or civilization, enjoying the solitude. They set up camp on a beach, a good distance from anywhere, and kept a fire going. To get to the trail leaving the beach was 1 kilometer along the beach and 2 kilometers to the road through the forest. The couple had met another camper named Claude from New Zealand, who they ran into earlier that day on the beach. Claude was planning on sleeping in his van, which he parked back up on the road. The couple invited him down to the beach for a fire, and the three shared a bottle of wine, talking amongst themselves around the fire. This is where things started to get a little creepy. The sun was starting to go down by this point, and the trio kept hearing what sounded like female voices from behind them in the bushes dividing the beach from the forest. It wasn't too dark out yet, though, so it was still possible that they were just other hikers or campers nearby, or even a group who anchored offshore and the sound was just bouncing in a weird way. All three of them could agree that they were hearing female voices. On that note, it was getting late and a little dark, so Claude said goodbye and set out to hike back to his car before it was too dark. Blair and Farah stayed by their campsite and stoked the fire because Farah was starting to get creeped out by the voices, which continued on into the darkness. It sounded like two female voices speaking, but whatever that was being said was unintelligible. It sounded to the couple like the voices were not far beyond the tree line now. They stayed up very late tending to the fire, and only when the voices had finally stopped did they decide to put out the fire and go to sleep in the tent. Before doing so, the two had scanned the cove with a flashlight several times looking for boats that could have been the source of the talking, but there was nothing in sight. It was around 3 a.m. when they laid down, finally ready to catch some sleep, but about 15 minutes after they laid down, Blair and Farah heard footsteps in the area around their campsite, over by where the fire was. They came from the direction of the bushes toward the inland behind them, a direction that was not traversable by people. The couple lay there hoping it was just a bear or any animal, because the only bears on the island are black bears, which usually are very timid around people. The footsteps went from the fire, then over to the tent, then back into the woods. 5 minutes later, the footsteps came back again to the fire, and now, clear as day, there were two female voices talking gibberish very loudly. Their communication did not resemble any languages known to Blair or Farah, and they seemed to be talking over each other, having what could barely be considered a conversation at full volume in the dead of night, very far away from civilization, without using lights to navigate through the dense brush relatively quietly in a direction that seemed impossible to traverse on foot. The two voices moved from the fire pit area over to the tent, still talking at a loud volume. They stood over the tent talking for a few seconds, then went completely dead silent. They went back into the woods to never be seen or heard again. Blair and Farah lay there completely frozen and afraid for a long time. They woke up around 11 a.m. the next day because of how late they fell asleep. They packed up first thing and never returned. The couple probably made the best decision to remain quiet in the tent, not drawing attention to themselves from whoever or whatever was outside. This happened about 2 years ago. I was out for a long walk in the woods, an activity I frequently do, especially in the summertime. On this day, I'd set out early. The route I typically take is in a large woodland with many different paths that take you deeper and deeper in. This time specifically, I decided to make a bit of a change to my usual routine. I decided to walk down a bank in order to walk alongside a river. You could catch glimpses of it if you were higher up on the path, but for the most part, you could really only hear it. It was also much more remote when compared to the other paths. I had been out for 3 hours at this point. I had a book, food and drink, and a first aid kit in my bag. I'd walked far and kept walking, exploring the area. However, I couldn't help but feel uncomfortable. I tried to ignore it, but it was intense. I'm usually one for the quiet outdoors in nature, but this feeling I had kept making me look behind me to the point where I was no longer relaxed. As I got deeper into the woods, the loneliness became unnerving. I figured I was just scaring myself and tried not to play into it. That's when a cloaked figure with gloves on ran out in front of me. I instantly jumped and felt extremely alarmed. The figure had a mask on, a crow's mask, like, think a plague doctor mask. I wanted to run, and everything inside me was telling me to run, but for whatever reason, I really wanted to seem like I wasn't bothered and that the figure had failed to cause much of a reaction. So I awkwardly said, "Okay, good one. I'll be on my way now." The figure didn't say anything, rather, it began tilting its head as I walked around it and continued down the path. It was just standing there, watching me. I was extremely creeped out. Once I walked past it, I just kept walking, feeling shaken but trying not to let it show. I was nervous to look back, but eventually, I did. The creepy figure was still in the same place, still watching me walk away. He, or possibly she, gave me a wave, but not a friendly one, just a sinister one. I don't really know how to explain it, but it was slow and felt threatening. I was stupid. At this point, I felt far enough away from the figure, so I flipped at the bird, a choice I instantly regretted. The figure went from standing and waving to a full-on unhinged run in my direction. I, at this point, didn't stick around and legged it out of there. The figure was making intense, loud, and almost demonic noises as it chased me. I honestly thought I was going to die, but it all came to an end when I managed to outrun this freak and made it up onto an open footpath where I was reunited with joggers and dog walkers. I was stuck in this nervous state but still so beyond happy to see other people. I tried to make as many of them aware as I could, and the whole situation was ultimately reported. I got home safely by catching a bus into town. They were rare on that side of the county, but I managed, thankfully. I felt lucky yet really detached and uncomfortable. The area was investigated by police, but it was so deep in the woods, I don't know how much they covered. As of yet, nothing has been reported since, and nobody nor anything has been found. I now avoid that area and don't plan on going too far off the beaten track on my own again. I still think about this experience. It's still vivid in my mind and absolutely terrifying to me.